Welcome back to another journey into history's darkest corners. Tonight, we're diving into the blood-soaked, disease-ridden world of historical piracy. And before we begin, let me be clear. This isn't the romanticized adventure you've seen in movies. This is the real thing. Brutal, desperate, and usually short. If you're enjoying these deep dives into history's grittiest chapters, consider hitting that subscribe button. And drop a comment with your location and current time. I love seeing who's exploring these dark histories with me. Now settle in, maybe grab some headphones for that immersive experience. And let's begin your descent into a life you probably won't survive. Chapter 1. The Taking. It begins not with adventure, but with terror. You're aboard the merchant vessel, Mary Catherine, hauling sugar and tobacco between Caribbean ports. The work is hard, the pay minimal, but it's honest work. Your calloused hands know every rope, every knot that keeps the cargo secure. The Caribbean sun has burnt your skin to leather, and salt has become a permanent taste in your mouth. Captain Morrison runs a tight ship, not cruel, but firm. He pays fair wages and doesn't cheat his crew on rations. You've sailed with him for 2 years, saving every coin you can for the small plot of land you want to buy in Jamaica. Simple dreams for a simple life. Then you see it, a shadow on the horizon, moving against the wind with unnatural speed. At first, it's just a speck, easily mistaken for a cloud or bird, but it grows larger and you notice something wrong with its movement. Ships shouldn't be able to cut through water like that, shouldn't be able to catch wind where there isn't any. The lookout spots it officially around noon. "Ship off the starboard bow," he calls down from the crow's nest. Captain Morrison climbs up with his spyglass. Could you see his face go white as ship's canvas? "All hands on deck," he roars. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers." But it's too late. The black flag goes up on the approaching vessel before you can even adjust course. Through the captain's spyglass you can see the design, a grinning skull wearing a crown with 2 crossed bones beneath it and an hourglass to the side. Below the skull, words in Latin that you can't read but understand instinctively: tempus fugit, time flies. The pirate ship, you later learn she's called the Wicked Mary, closes distance like a hungry wolf. Her crew swarms the rigging like ants, adjusting sails with practiced precision. You can hear them now shouting orders in 6 languages: English, Spanish, French, something that might be Dutch. Captain Morrison orders the crew to dump cargo overboard, trying to lighten the ship for speed. Sugar barrels splash into the Caribbean, creating white clouds in the blue water. It's heartbreaking to watch months of work disappear, but speed might save your lives. It doesn't help. The Wicked Mary closes to within cannon range by mid-afternoon. Their first shot isn't aimed to sink, it's a warning, passing close enough to your bow that you feel the wind displacement. And the message is clear: surrender or face the consequences. Morrison considers fighting. The Mary Catherine has 4 small cannons, more for show than warfare, against the 8 visible gun ports on the pirate vessel, plus whatever armament they've got hidden. It would be suicide. "Strike the colours," he orders quietly. The British flag comes down slowly, a gesture of surrender that tastes like ashes in your mouth. But the pirates don't accept surrender gracefully. They fire another shot, this one deliberate. A chain shot that takes down your mainmast in an explosion of splinters and screaming wood. The mast crashes across the deck, crushing the helmsman instantly and pinning 2 other sailors beneath its weight. They don't board gracefully either. They swing over on ropes, screaming like banshees, cutlasses flashing in the sun. Their faces are painted with streaks of red and black, some artistic, others clearly dried blood. One man has filed his teeth to points. Another wears a necklace of what looks suspiciously like human ears. Your captain dies first, Not in combat, but execution style, a blade through the ribs before he can even speak, delivered by their quartermaster, a scarred brute called Iron Tom, whose left hand has been replaced by an actual iron hook. "Anyone else want to play hero?" Iron Tom asks, wiping blood from his blade. His accent is English, but roughened by years of shouting orders over ocean winds. The crew that survives the initial assault huddles together, hands raised, praying to whatever gods might listen. The pirates go through the ship like locusts, stripping it of anything valuable. Your personal possessions, 2 shirts, a pair of good boots, the small bag of coins you've been saving, vanish into their pockets. They even take your hat, leaving you bareheaded under the scorching sun. You're not given a choice about joining them. "You know how to sail?" asks Iron Tom, grabbing you by the shirt. You nod, too terrified to lie. "Good. You're crew now. Try to run, and I'll feed you to the sharks piece by piece. Try to fight, and I'll let the boys use you for target practice. Understood?" The water around both ships is already red with blood from the men who tried to resist. Swimming means dying, and dying slowly at that. You've heard stories of shark-feeding frenzies in these waters. So you nod, and just like that, your old life ends and something darker begins. They strip you of everything: clothes, possessions, dignity. You're handed a grimy shirt that might once have been white, but now bears stains in colors you don't want to identify. The breeches are torn at the knee and smell like they belong to someone who died wearing them. The boots squelch when you walk, and you suspect the previous owner had serious foot problems. "Welcome to the Brotherhood," laughs a toothless pirate, who introduces himself as Gummy Pete. He shoves you toward the Wicked Mary, where rope ladders hang over the side like the tongues of dead beasts. Your first night aboard is hell incarnate. The ship rocks endlessly in ways that make your merchant vessel experience seem gentle as a cradle. The Wicked Mary is built for speed and maneuverability, not comfort. She cuts through waves rather than riding them, and every motion feels like she's trying to shake you off her deck and into the hungry sea. The crew quarters are worse than any stable you've ever seen. You sleep on a mouldy plank in a space that reeks of sweat, vomit, stale beer, and something indefinably rotten that might be decay, or might just be the accumulated filth of men who consider bathing a sign of weakness. And the man next to you, a skeletal figure who introduces himself as Whistling Ned, snores like a dying walrus and tosses constantly, muttering in what sounds like French. Someone across the hold prays in Spanish until dawn, a steady stream of Ave Marias and Padre Nuestros that would be comforting if not delivered in the terrified whisper of a man who knows he's already damned. Sleep comes in fragments, broken by the ship's groans, the scurrying of rats, and the occasional scream from the deck above. You learn later that some of the Mary Catherine survivors who showed too much resistance are being educated about proper pirate behavior with whips and hot irons. Historically, many pirates were indeed pressed into service this way. Ships like those of Samuel Bellamy, Edward Lowe, or Bartholomew Roberts often recruited through force rather than persuasion. The golden age of piracy, roughly 1650–1730, saw hundreds of merchant sailors forced into piracy simply by being in the wrong place when the wrong ship appeared on the horizon. Once aboard, desertion wasn't really an option. The ocean was vast, islands were few, and pirate crews watched each other constantly. Attempted deserters faced flogging, marooning, or death, and their crewmates were often required to participate in the punishment to prove their own loyalty. Chapter 2. The Hierarchy of Hell. Dawn brings your first real look at your new world, and it's worse than you imagined. The Wicked Mary is a converted Spanish galleon, probably captured years ago and modified for piracy. Her original ornate decorations have been stripped away and replaced with more practical features, additional gun ports, reinforced rigging, and storage for the massive amounts of supplies needed for long voyages away from friendly ports. The deck is a patchwork of repairs, bloodstains and burn marks. Cannonballs are stacked in pyramids near each gun position. Barrels of gunpowder sit ominously close to the galley, where smoke rises from what you hope is breakfast, but smells like burning leather. The crew numbers about 60 souls, though souls might be generous. They range from teenagers who look like they've never shaved to grizzled veterans whose scars tell stories of a dozen battles. Most are white, but you notice several black faces among them, freed slaves or escaped ones, seeking freedom in the only place that might accept them. Captain Redbeard emerges from his cabin as the sun clears the horizon. He's not what you expected, not huge and imposing, but lean and dangerous, like a well-used blade. His famous red beard is streaked with grey and braided with small bones that click when he moves his head. His coat was once fine velvet, but now bears patches and stains. Most unsettling are his eyes, pale blue and completely cold, like looking into winter sky. Iron Tom calls for assembly, and the crew gathers in a rough semicircle. You're pushed to the front with the other new recruits, 3 survivors from your ship, plus 2 men from some previous capture who still look shell-shocked. Listen well, you landlubbers. Redbeard begins, his voice carrying easily across the deck, despite being barely above normal volume. Your crew now, whether you like it or not. That means you live by our articles, fight by our code, and die by our rules if necessary. He produces a rolled parchment from his coat, the articles of agreement that will govern your new life. The document is stained with what looks suspiciously like blood, and several signatures at the bottom appear to have been made with the same dark red substance. The rules sound almost reasonable at first. Everyone gets a share of plunder. Major decisions are voted on democratically. The captain can be replaced if the crew loses confidence. Food and supplies are distributed equally, with slightly larger portions for officers and specialists. But the punishments for breaking these rules reveal the document's true nature. Theft from the common fund, 40 lashes and loss of share in the next prize. Desertion, marooning on a deserted island with a pistol and 1 shot. Cowardice in battle, death by hanging. Striking an officer, loss of right hand. The sea is a harsh mistress, Redbeard continues, and we're her bastard children, but we follow these rules because they keep us alive and profitable. Break them, and you'll wish you'd drowned with your old ship. Iron Tom takes over then, explaining the ship's hierarchy in more detail. Redbeard makes the ultimate decisions, but he's not a tyrant. His authority comes from the crew's confidence in his leadership. That confidence can be withdrawn at any time through a formal vote, though such votes are rare and usually bloody affairs. Tom himself serves as quartermaster, the most powerful position after captain. He settles disputes among the crew, handles distribution of loot, and serves as a check on the captain's power. In many ways, he has more day-to-day authority than Redbeard himself. Below them come the specialists, Sawbones McGillicuddy, the ship's surgeon and former barber who learned medicine through necessity and rum, Dead-Eye Dan, the sailing master who navigates by stars and instinct, Powder Pete, the gunner who treats cannons like beloved children, and Mother Martha, the cook whose meals might kill you but whose protection is worth having. Everyone else falls into the general crew, divided into watches and work groups. The day watch works from dawn to dusk, the night watch from dusk to dawn. Both groups handle everything from sailing to fighting, cleaning to raiding. Keep your mouth shut and your blade sharp, Iron Tom tells you personally, pulling you aside after the General Assembly. Smart pirates live longer than brave ones. Heroes die fast and ugly out here. You're assigned to the day watch under a bosun called Scarface Sally. Yes, a woman, though she's more dangerous than most men you've known. Half her face was destroyed by grape shot years ago, leaving a mass of scar tissue that makes her expression permanently fierce. She speaks in a gravelly whisper, but commands absolute respect from the crew. Your duties begin immediately: hauling rope, swabbing decks, maintaining the rigging, and following orders barked by men with more scars than teeth. The work is backbreaking, especially in the Caribbean heat. Your hands blister within hours, then blister again when the first blisters break. But you also start learning the intricate skills needed to sail a ship like the Wicked Mary, how to read wind direction by watching the water's surface, which ropes control which sails, and how small adjustments can mean the difference between speed and disaster. How to tie knots that will hold in a storm but can be released instantly when needed. The ship's routine becomes your routine. Wake at dawn to the bosun's whistle. Work until noon. Break for the main meal. Work until evening. Then supper, and whatever entertainment the crew provides, usually gambling, drinking, or fighting, sometimes all three, simultaneously. Lights out comes with full darkness, enforced by the simple reality that oil and candles are precious commodities. You sleep when you can, work when you must, and try not to think about what you've become. Chapter 3. The Floating Graveyard. 3 weeks into your new life, death comes calling in the form of disease. It starts with One-Eye Murphy, an appropriately named pirate who lost his left eye to a Spanish sword, complaining about his gums bleeding when he chews his morning hardtack. "Probably just bit myself," he mutters, spitting pink saliva over the rail. But within days the bleeding gets worse. His gums swell and turn purple, his breath develops a sickly sweet smell, and purple bruises begin appearing on his arms and legs like evil flowers blooming under his skin. Scurvy, the sailor's curse, the disease that has killed more seamen than all the battles in history combined. It comes from lack of fresh fruit and vegetables, though most of the crew blames everything else: bad water, cursed air, punishment from God, or hexes placed by enemies. Murphy tries every folk remedy known to sailors. He chews pine needles stripped from the ship's mast, drinks his own urine mixed with rum, rubs salt into his bleeding gums until he screams. Nothing helps. His teeth begin loosening in his mouth, first wobbling when he talks, then falling out one by one to clink on the deck like dropped coins. Or the sound haunts your dreams, that tiny click of tooth hitting wood, followed by Murphy's anguished moan. Soon he's gumming his food like an old man, drooling constantly because he can't close his mouth properly. He dies on a Tuesday morning, found in his hammock with his mouth open to the sky and blood dried on his chin. By Thursday, 3 more men show symptoms. Purple Jake gets his nickname that week, when bruises cover his body like a second skin. Limping Louis can barely walk as his joints swell and stiffen. Young Billy, barely 16, sobs at night because his teeth are too loose to bite properly. Sawbones. McGillicuddy claims he knows the cure: fresh citrus fruit, preferably limes or oranges. Seen it work a dozen times, he insists, but the ship's stores contain nothing fresh, except the rats in the hold, and even those are looking poorly. Captain Redbeard orders a course change toward the nearest island rumoured to have fruit trees, but that's 5 days sailing if the wind holds and the weather stays fair. It's a gamble. Changing course means abandoning their planned raid on a Spanish treasure ship, potentially costing the crew thousands in gold and silver. The wind doesn't hold. It dies completely on the 2nd day, leaving the Wicked Mary becalmed on seas smooth as glass. The ship sits motionless under a blazing sun, sails hanging limp, the crew growing more desperate by the hour. That's when the storm hits. Not the mercy of rain they prayed for, but a squall that comes out of nowhere like divine punishment. The sky turns black in minutes, and the wind goes from nothing to hurricane force without warning. You spend hours in the rigging, soaked to the bone and clinging for your life, trying to secure sails that snap like whips in the gale. Lightning illuminates the ship in stark white moments, and in those flashes you see terror on every face. Hardened pirates reduced to children afraid of the dark. The waves aren't the mountain-tall monsters of a true hurricane, but they're big enough to throw the ship around like a toy. Water crashes over the rail constantly, flooding the deck and washing 2 men overboard before anyone can throw them lines. Below deck, the sick men suffer in ways that would make angels weep. Purple Jake is thrown from his hammock and breaks his already weakened arm when he hits the bulkhead. Limping Louis vomits blood with each wave that tosses the ship. Young Billy just lies in his bunk, tears streaming down his face, too weak to even cry out. By morning, the storm has passed, but it's taken a toll. 2 men lost overboard, Dancing Jim and Silent Pete, both good sailors who deserved better deaths. Another, Laughing Jack, who got his name from his perpetual grin, simply stopped breathing in his hammock during the night. His bunkmate found him at dawn, stiff and grey, eyes open to nothing. The bodies go overboard with minimal ceremony. Redbeard says a few words. They sailed with honour and died with the sea. Then the canvas-wrapped corpses splash into water that's already moving on to other concerns. Disease wasn't the only killer aboard pirate ships, historically speaking. Scurvy alone probably killed more pirates than all the naval battles combined. The condition results from vitamin C deficiency, causing the breakdown of collagen in the body. Teeth fall out, wounds don't heal, joints swell, and eventually the victim hemorrhages internally. Pirates knew citrus fruit prevented scurvy, but fresh fruit was expensive and spoiled quickly on long voyages. Most ships made do with pickled vegetables and hardtack biscuits, hoping to reach port before the crew started dying. Accidents were equally common and often more gruesome. Men fell from rigging during storms, were crushed by shifting cargo, or suffered horrible injuries from the massive cannons that were their primary weapons. Without proper medical care, even minor wounds could turn deadly through infection. The Wicked Mary carries medical supplies, bandages, needles, rum for antiseptic, laudanum for pain, but quantities are limited, and Sawbones McGillicuddy's training extends only to what he's learned through trial and error, mostly error. Chapter 4: The Surgeon's Butcher Shop. Your first real injury comes during what should have been routine maintenance. You're helping repair a torn sail, 30 feet up in the rigging, when a sudden gust of wind catches the canvas and whips it around like a living thing. The sail's edge, reinforced with rope and metal grommets, lashes across your left arm from wrist to elbow, laying it open to the bone. The pain doesn't hit immediately, just a cold sensation and the odd realization that your arm is suddenly wet. Then you look down and see blood soaking your shirt, running down to drip from your fingers like red rain onto the deck below. "Man down!" someone shouts, and suddenly there are hands grabbing you, pulling you back toward the mast, lowering you to the deck with rough efficiency. The pain hits then, a white-hot agony that makes you scream despite your attempts to stay strong. They carry you to the ship's surgery, a small cabin near the stern that doubles as Sawbones McGillicuddy's living quarters. The smell hits you before you cross the threshold: alcohol, blood, and something putrid that might be infection or might just be the surgeon himself. Sawbones is a former barber who turned to piracy when his London shop was burned by competitors. He learned medicine the hard way through necessity and desperation, treating everything from sword wounds to plague boils. His success rate isn't high, but he's the only medical help available between the Caribbean islands. "This'll sting a mite," he says in his cheerful Cockney accent, then pours rum directly into your wound without further warning. The alcohol hits exposed nerve endings like liquid fire, and your scream echoes off the cabin walls loud enough to be heard on deck. But the rum does its job, cleaning out the dirt, rope fibers, and bits of sail that were driven into the wound. McGillicuddy examines the damage with hands that are surprisingly gentle, despite their coating of old scars and questionable stains. "Missed the big veins," he pronounces cheerfully. "Might have nicked some tendons, but you'll live to climb rigging again, probably. Now hold still while I sew you up." The needle is huge, more suited for sail-making than surgery, and the thread looks suspiciously like it was pulled from someone's spare shirt. But McGillicuddy's stitching technique, while crude, is effective. He pulls the wound closed with tight, even sutures, whistling a cheerful tune as he works. "Learned this from a real doctor once," he explains as he ties off the final stitch. Course, that was after I'd already sewed up 3 men with my barber training. Funny thing, cutting hair and cutting flesh ain't so different. And both bleed when you do it wrong. He wraps the wound in cloth that might once have been white, securing it with strips torn from what definitely used to be someone's shirt. Keep it dry if you can, though that's a joke on a ship. Clean it with rum every few days and pray it doesn't fester. If it starts smelling like old fish, come see me and I'll take the arm off before the rot spreads. You're lucky, though you don't feel it. You've seen what McGillicuddy calls major surgery, and it's enough to give you nightmares for months, like when Bosun Williams got his leg crushed by a falling barrel during a storm. The barrel was full of water, nearly 200 pounds, and it caught Williams below the knee, snapping both bones like twigs. The leg bent at angles legs aren't meant to bend, and Williams's screaming could be heard over the thunder. There was no saving the limb. McGillicuddy took one look and shook his head grimly. "Comes off or you die," he announced. "Your choice, but make it quick before shock kills you anyway." Williams chose amputation. They held him down with ropes and leather straps, gave him a piece of wood to bite, and poured rum down his throat until he stopped making sense. And McGillicuddy went to work with his bone saw, a rusty implement that looked more suited to cutting firewood than human limbs. The sound was indescribable, part grinding, part tearing, punctuated by William's muffled screams despite the leather gag. Blood pooled on the cabin floor faster than rags could soak it up. When the saw finally broke through the last bit of bone, McGillicuddy cauterized the stump with a red-hot blade, heated in the galley fire. Williams lived surprisingly. The fever took him close to death for a week, but his constitution pulled him through. Now he stumps around on a wooden peg carved from the ship's mast, claiming it's better than his original leg because it doesn't get tired or cold. Plus, it's useful for intimidating prisoners, he adds with dark humor. Nothing says pirate like a proper peg leg. Pirate surgery was brutal, but sometimes necessary. Ships carried basic medical supplies, bandages, needles, rum for antiseptic, laudanum for pain when available. Some crews were lucky enough to have genuine physicians who'd turned to piracy for better pay, adventure, or because they'd fled legal troubles on land. But most ship surgeons were like McGillicuddy, men with basic knowledge who learned through practice. They treated everything from gunshot wounds to broken bones, tropical diseases to infected cuts. Their success rate was probably better than you'd expect, mainly because the men who survived pirate life were already tough as leather. The instruments were crude but functional. Bone saws, forceps, needles for stitching, tourniquets to stop bleeding, hot irons for cauterization, opium or laudanum for pain when available. though rum was more common and nearly as effective for short procedures. Anesthesia as we know it didn't exist. Major surgery meant restraining the patient and hoping they passed out from pain before dying from shock. Many pirates preferred to die rather than face amputation, but others, like Williams, chose the saw over certain death. Your own wound heals surprisingly well. The stitches hold. The infection you feared never materializes, and within 2 weeks, you're back to full duty. The scar remains. A jagged lightning bolt on your forearm that will mark you as a survivor for the rest of your life. Chapter 5. The First Hunt. Your first real taste of piracy comes 6 weeks after your unwilling recruitment. A Spanish merchant ship is spotted at dawn, her sails heavy with wind, sitting low in the water, a sure sign of valuable cargo weighing down her hull. The lookout's cry of "Sail ho!" transforms the Wicked Mary from floating dormitory to war machine in minutes. Captain Redbeard emerges from his cabin fully dressed despite the early hour. Pirates, you learn, sleep ready for action. "What flag?" he calls up to the crow's nest. "Spanish merchant, Captain. 3 masts, maybe 40 men, sitting deep." Redbeard grins, showing gold teeth among the yellowed ones. "Gentlemen," he announces to the assembling crew, "Providence has sent us breakfast." The transformation that follows is remarkable and terrifying. Men who, moments before, were yawning and scratching themselves, suddenly move with purpose and precision. The gun crews begin loading cannons with practiced efficiency. First powder, then shot, then wadding, each step checked and rechecked, because a misloaded cannon can explode and kill its own crew. Muskets are distributed from the armory, along with cutlasses, boarding axes, and pistols. Every blade is tested for sharpness on pieces of rope or spare wood. Powder horns are filled, shot pouches distributed, and bandages prepared, because everyone knows that even successful raids usually mean casualties. The Jolly Roger goes up, not the cartoon skull from children's books, but something more personal and terrifying. This one shows a skeleton dancing over 3 skulls, painted in what looks suspiciously like dried blood. The skeleton holds an hourglass in one bony hand and a dagger in the other, with the words "Time's Up" painted in rough letters below. The flag isn't just decoration, it's psychological warfare. Different pirate crews use different designs, each meant to convey a specific message. Some promised mercy to those who surrendered quickly. Others, like Blackbeard's flag showing a skeleton holding an hourglass and a spear pointed at a bleeding heart, promised that time was running out and death was coming. The chase begins when the Spanish ship spots you and realizes what you are. They try to run, cramming on every bit of sail they can manage, but merchant ships are built for cargo capacity, not speed. The Wicked Mary is a predator built for hunting, and she closes the distance with inevitable persistence. "Fire a warning shot across her bow," Redbeard orders when you're within cannon range. The starboard bow chaser roars, sending a 4-pound ball whistling across the Spanish ship's path to splash into the sea beyond. The message is clear: surrender now or face the consequences. The Spanish captain's response comes in the form of his own cannon, a wild shot that falls short by 50 yards but makes his intentions clear. He's going to fight. "Stubborn bastard," Redbeard mutters approvingly. "I like that in a man. Shame I'm going to have to kill him for it. All batteries, prepare to fire." What follows is a brief but vicious artillery duel. The Wicked Mary has 8 cannon on each side, plus bow and stern chasers, 20 guns total against the merchant ship's 6 small cannon. It's not a fair fight, but pirates aren't interested in fairness. The first full broadside from the pirate ship is devastating. 4 shots hit the Spanish vessel's hull, 1 smashes through her stern windows, and another brings down her mizzenmast in a crash of splintered wood and tangled rigging. Through the smoke, you can see men running on the Spanish deck, some clutching wounds, others frantically trying to return fire with their remaining guns. One of their shots actually hits key, punching through the Wicked Mary's hull just above the waterline and sending splinters flying across your deck. "That's the spirit," laughs Iron Tom, wiping blood from a shallow cut on his cheek. "Makes it more sporting when they fight back." The Spanish ship's resistance doesn't last long. Another broadside kills half their gun crew and starts a fire on their main deck. When grappling hooks bite into their rails and drag the ships together, their remaining fight goes out of them like air from a punctured bladder. The boarding begins with pirates swinging across on ropes, screaming like demons. You follow because staying behind means being branded a coward, and cowards on pirate ships face unpleasant consequences. The gap between ships looks enormous when you're swinging across it, and the water below churns with sharks attracted by the blood already in the water. You land hard on the Spanish deck, roll, and come up with your cutlass in hand just as a Spanish sailor swings his own blade at your head. Training kicks in, not formal sword work, but the brutal close-quarters fighting that Scarface Sally has been teaching you during quiet watches. Duck the swing, step inside his guard, and thrust upward with your blade. The steel slides between his ribs with surprising ease, grating against bone before sliding home. He looks at you with wide, surprised eyes, blood bubbling from his mouth, then collapses. You've killed your first man in combat, and it doesn't feel heroic or glorious. It feels like work, necessary, brutal work that leaves your hands shaking and your stomach churning with something that might be guilt or might just be seasickness. The battle lasts perhaps 20 minutes, but feels like hours. When it's over, you're standing in what can only be described as a slaughterhouse. Bodies everywhere. Blood soaking into the wooden deck. The smell of gunpowder and death thick enough to taste. The Spanish captain lies near his ship's wheel, still alive but gutted by Iron Tom's blade. He uses his last breath to curse the entire pirate crew in fluid Spanish, calling down the wrath of God and the Spanish Navy on all your heads. "Brave man," Redbeard says approvingly, as the captain dies. Pity he chose the wrong profession. Chapter 6. The Devil's Inventory. The cargo hold of the captured Spanish ship reveals treasures that make the crew cheer like children on Christmas morning. Not the chests of gold doubloons from storybooks, but something more valuable to men who live on the margins of civilization. Supplies, trade goods, and actual money in forms they can spend. Barrels of sugar, both white and brown, worth their weight in silver at the right ports. Bolts of fine cloth, silk, cotton, and linen, that can be traded for weapons, food, or passage to safer harbors. Crates of tobacco from the Virginia colonies, already rolled into cigars that will fetch premium prices in European markets. There are more exotic items too, bags of cocoa beans from Central America, jars of indigo dye worth a fortune to textile makers, and small kegs of vanilla that smell like paradise compared to the ship's usual odors of sweat and decay. But the real prize sits in the captain's cabin, an iron-bound chest containing Spanish reales, Portuguese gold pieces, and even some Dutch florins. Real money coined and stamped that will spend anywhere in the Caribbean. Iron Tom counts it twice before announcing the total, 800 pieces of 8, plus assorted smaller denominations. It's not a king's ransom, but it's enough to keep the crew fed, armed, and drunk for months. More importantly, it's proof that piracy can pay, that the risks and hardships might actually lead to something better than slow starvation on a legitimate merchant vessel. But treasures come with costs, and this one extracts its price immediately. The dying Spanish captain uses his last breath not just for curses in his native language, but for words in accented English that chill every pirate to the bone. May you know no peace on land or sea. May the very waters turn against you. May every port close its gates and every honest man raise his hand against you. This gold is cursed with the blood of innocents, and it will bring you nothing but sorrow. Some of the crew laugh nervously, dismissing it as the ranting of a dying man. Others make signs against evil, crossing themselves, touching iron, or muttering counter-prayers. You don't know what to believe, but that night the wind dies completely, leaving the wicked Mary becalmed on seas as smooth and lifeless as polished glass. The division of spoils follows the articles to the letter, but tensions run high as men calculate their shares. Captain Redbeard gets a double portion, as does Iron Tom. The sailing master, gunner, surgeon and boatswain each receive 1.5 shares. Regular crew members get 1 share each, while the newest recruits, including you, receive 3/4 of a share. Your portion isn't much by land standards: 12 Spanish reales, a bolt of cotton cloth, a small bag of sugar, and 2 of the precious vanilla sticks. But it's yours, earned with blood and risk, and ownership changes everything. For the first time since being pressed into service, you possess something of value. The sensation is intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The silver feels heavy in your hands, and you understand why men kill for money. It's not just metal, it's possibilities, choices, a future that doesn't depend entirely on the whims of weather and stronger men. But ownership also brings paranoia. Now you have something others might want to steal. You catch crew members eyeing your small pile of treasure, and you know they're making calculations about how much you could really defend it. You start sleeping with your knife closer and your possessions hidden in different parts of your hammock. The psychological transformation is subtle but complete. A month ago you were a victim, pressed into service, stripped of everything, dependent on others for survival. Now you're a participant, a stakeholder in the violent enterprise that has become your life. The next few weeks pass in relative calm as the wicked Mary makes for Tortuga, the famous pirate haven where stolen goods can be sold and supplies replenished. You expect a den of iniquity and find something more complex, a muddy settlement of taverns, brothels and shops that cater to men with blood on their hands and silver in their pockets. Tortuga operates under its own laws, or rather, the absence of most laws. French colonial authorities maintain a token presence, but they're either bought off or simply choose to look the other way as long as the pirates spend money and don't cause too much trouble in town. The harbour is filled with vessels of questionable origin, flying flags of convenience. Some are clearly pirate ships, low, fast vessels bristling with guns. Others maintain the pretense of legitimate trade while carrying crews who could turn buccaneer at a moment's notice. You spend your first night on solid ground in months, getting spectacularly drunk on rum that tastes like liquid fire mixed with liquid lightning. The tavern, called the Drowned Rat, serves drinks in wooden cups that have been carved from ship's timbers, each one bearing the scars of knife fights and bullet holes. The rum hits differently on land. Without the ship's constant motion, alcohol goes straight to your head like a cannonball through canvas. You find yourself telling your life story to a one-eyed prostitute who listens with professional sympathy while calculating how much of your newly acquired silver she can extract. You wake up the next morning in an alley behind the tavern, missing one boot, most of your money, and your new cotton shirt. Your head feels like someone's been using it for cannonball practice, and your mouth tastes like something crawled in there and died. But you're alive, which counts for something in this business. And surprisingly, You still have your weapons. Even drunk pirates know better than to leave themselves completely defenseless in a place like Tortuga. The town operates on a simple economy. Pirates bring stolen goods, local merchants buy them at reduced prices, then sell them to legitimate traders who don't ask too many questions about provenance. Everyone profits, everyone stays quiet, and the colonial authorities collect their unofficial taxes through bribes and protection fees. You learn to navigate this world carefully. The wrong word in the wrong tavern can start a fight that ends with bodies floating in the harbour. But the right connections can get you information, supplies, or passage to anywhere in the Caribbean. Chapter 7: The Society of Scoundrels. Life aboard the Wicked Mary develops its own rhythm as weeks turn to months. The ship becomes your entire universe, a floating society with its own customs, hierarchies, and unwritten rules that matter more than any official articles. You discover that pirate crews aren't just bands of criminals, but complex social structures born from necessity and survival. Men from different countries, social classes, and backgrounds must somehow live and work together in a space barely larger than a village square. The crew includes former Royal Navy sailors who deserted rather than face flogging for minor infractions, escaped slaves seeking freedom that exists nowhere else in the colonial world, indentured servants who chose piracy over completing their terms of bondage, failed merchants, discharged soldiers, younger sons of noble families seeking fortune through less conventional means. Their stories emerge during long watches and quiet moments between raids. Dancing Jim, lost in that storm weeks ago, had been a London pickpocket transported to Jamaica for theft. Iron Tom started as a legitimate privateer before the war ended and left him unemployed. Mother Martha claims to be the daughter of a Spanish don, though her accent suggests humbler origins. What binds them isn't loyalty or friendship, but mutual dependence. Every man's survival depends on the crew's success, and the crew's success depends on every man doing his job. It's a brutal form of democracy where incompetence or cowardice can literally get everyone killed. You start to understand the pirate code not as arbitrary rules, but as practical solutions to life or death problems. Sharing plunder equally prevents the murderous jealousy that could tear the crew apart. Democratic decision-making ensures that unpopular captains get replaced before their poor judgment sinks the ship. Harsh punishments for theft and desertion maintain discipline. When legal authority doesn't exist, the ship develops its own culture, distinct from both the landlubber world and legitimate maritime service. Songs that would be considered treasonous on shore are sung openly here. Stories of successful raids get embellished and retold until they become legends. Superstitions develop around everything from the color of the sunrise to the direction birds fly. You learn the intricate social hierarchies that exist within the supposed equality of pirate democracy. Redbeard may be captain, but his authority comes from the crew's confidence in his leadership. Iron Tom wields day-to-day power as quartermaster, but he answers to the crew's collective will. Even the lowliest sailor can challenge an officer's decision if he's willing to face the consequences. Status depends on proven courage, useful skills, and the respect of your crewmates. A man who shows cowardice in battle will find himself isolated and eventually voted off the ship at the next port. But someone who demonstrates valor, seamanship, or other valuable abilities can rise quickly through the informal ranks. Your own position gradually improves as you prove yourself reliable in both sailing and fighting. Scarface. Sally begins trusting you with more complex tasks, navigation calculations, supervising newer crew members, and eventually standing watch alone during calm weather. The transformation is subtle but profound. You stop thinking of yourself as a kidnapped merchant sailor and begin seeing yourself as part of something larger, darker, and more dangerous. When new prisoners are brought aboard from captured ships, you find yourself on the other side of the recruitment process, helping to educate them about their new life. It's a moral erosion that happens gradually, like a shoreline worn away by persistent waves. Each small compromise, staying silent during a brutal initiation, participating in raids against ships that might carry innocent passengers, keeping your share of loot taken from working families, makes the next compromise easier. Chapter 8. The Damnation of Ordinary Men. The moral weight of piracy settles on you slowly, like barnacles accumulating on a ship's hull. At first, it's easy to rationalize you're a victim of circumstances pressed into service against your will. The Spanish ship fought back, so killing in battle was self-defense. The cargo was already stolen from colonies built on enslaved labor, so redistributing it hardly seems criminal. But rationalization becomes harder with each raid. The second ship you attack is a small trading sloop carrying supplies to struggling plantation workers. The third is a passenger vessel with families aboard, men, women, and children, whose only crime was booking passage on the wrong ship at the wrong time. You watch Iron Tom interrogate a merchant captain about hidden valuables, using techniques that would make Spanish inquisitors proud. You see Mother Martha calmly rifling through passengers' personal belongings while they weep for mercy. You participate in the methodical looting that strips working families of their life savings. The crew operates with casual efficiency that's more chilling than dramatic cruelty. This isn't passionate violence born from anger or revenge. It's professional brutality, systematic and businesslike. Pirates aren't romantic rebels fighting tyranny. They're maritime predators who found a profitable niche in the colonial economy. Some crew members seem to genuinely enjoy the fear in their victims' eyes. Crazy Pete collects ears from those who resist too vigorously, stringing them on a necklace he wears like a badge of honor. Gummy Jack specializes in terrorizing children, claiming their screams make parents more cooperative about revealing hidden wealth. Others, like yourself, participate because the alternative is being branded a coward and facing the crew's collective punishment. You tell yourself you're doing what's necessary to survive, but the distinction between victim and victimizer blurs with each act of violence you witness or enable. The ship's informal culture celebrates this moral flexibility. Successful raids are toasted with stolen wine. Tales of particularly clever or brutal exploits become part of the crew's oral tradition. Men who show squeamishness about necessary violence are mocked as weak or effeminate. You discover that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary evil when circumstances align properly. The same men who share their food during storms and risk their lives to save drowning crewmates will torture captives for information about hidden treasure. Kindness and cruelty coexist without apparent contradiction. The psychological mechanisms that enable this compartmentalization become clear through observation. Victims are dehumanized as Spanish dogs or merchant pigs, not real people with families and feelings, but abstract enemies who deserve whatever happens to them. Violence becomes routine through repetition, losing its emotional impact through familiarity. Religious belief provides another layer of rationalization. Many pirates consider themselves God's instruments for punishing the wicked, Spanish Catholics, slave-owning planters, or corrupt colonial officials. Others embrace damnation proudly, claiming they'd rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. You find yourself adopting these psychological defenses without conscious choice. It's easier to sleep at night if you think of raids as military actions against legitimate targets rather than robbery and murder against innocent people. It's simpler to focus on the crew's survival needs rather than dwelling on the human cost of meeting those needs. The transformation isn't complete. You still feel guilt and shame, especially during quiet moments when there's nothing to distract from moral reflection. But these feelings become increasingly compartmentalized, stored away in mental spaces you visit less and less frequently. Chapter 9. The Price of Paradise. 4 months into your pirate career. The Wicked Mary makes port at a hidden cove on an unnamed Caribbean island. It's the kind of place that doesn't appear on any official maps, a sheltered bay surrounded by jungle, with fresh water, fruit trees, and enough space to careen the ship for repairs. The island serves as an unofficial pirate base, complete with semi-permanent structures built by successive crews over the years. Palm frond huts provide shelter during extended stays. A blacksmith's forge allows for weapon and tool repairs. Gardens planted by previous visitors yield vegetables that help prevent scurvy. It should be paradise: tropical weather, beautiful scenery, abundant food, and the freedom to live without kings, laws, or masters. For a few days, it almost feels that way. You swim in warm, clear water for the first time in months. You eat fresh fruit until your stomach aches from the unfamiliar richness. You sleep on solid ground under stars that seem close enough to touch. But paradise comes with a price, and you learn it quickly. The island's isolation makes it vulnerable to the same petty jealousies and power struggles that plague the ship, but without the external pressures that usually keep conflicts manageable. Within a week, crew members are forming factions around different leaders. Some support Redbeard's cautious approach to raiding, preferring smaller, safer targets. Others rally behind Iron Tom's advocacy for bolder strikes against heavily defended treasure ships. A third group, led by the sailing master Deadeye Dan, wants to abandon piracy altogether and establish a permanent settlement. The disagreements might seem reasonable on paper, but they quickly escalate into violence. Pirates settling disputes with democracy is a romantic myth. More often, they settle them with knives and pistols at dawn. You witness 3 duels in 5 days, resulting in 2 deaths and 1 permanent crippling. The deaths create new problems. With a crew of 60, losing even 2 men means everyone else must work harder. More importantly, the dead men had specialized skills. One was an experienced gunner, the other a carpenter who understood the ship's construction intimately. Their knowledge died with them, making the entire crew less capable of survival. Food becomes an issue despite the island's apparent abundance. 60 men consume resources quickly, and foraging requires skills most pirates lack. The fruit trees are stripped bare within days. Fish are plentiful but require time and effort to catch. Hunting the island's small game yields little meat for the energy expended. Sanitation becomes a nightmare. 60 men living in close proximity without proper waste disposal systems create conditions ripe for disease. The beautiful lagoon where you first swam becomes a cesspit within a week. Flies multiply exponentially, carrying diseases between the crowded living areas. The tropical paradise also harbors less obvious dangers. Insects carry malaria and yellow fever. Venomous snakes hide in the undergrowth. Plants that look edible can cause paralysis or death. Several crew members fall seriously ill from eating unfamiliar berries or being bitten by creatures they didn't recognize as dangerous. Most insidiously, the isolation breeds paranoia and cabin fever. Without the shared purpose of sailing and raiding, old grudges resurface and fester. Men who seemed like friends on the ship reveal themselves as enemies when confined together without escape. Accusations of theft, cheating, and betrayal multiply daily. You realize that the ship's constant dangers, storms, battles, the need for cooperation to survive, actually held the crew together by giving them common enemies and shared goals. Remove those external pressures, and the natural human tendency toward conflict reasserts itself with a vengeance. The crew votes to leave after 3 weeks, but the decision comes too late to prevent lasting damage. 2 more men are dead from fever, 3 others are too sick to work effectively. The remaining crew is split into hostile factions that barely cooperate even when cooperation is necessary for survival. Redbeard uses the departure as an opportunity to reassert his authority, but his control is weaker than before. Iron Tom openly challenges his decisions. Deadeye. Dan has gathered enough support to pose a serious threat to the captain's position. The ship sails away from Paradise more divided and vulnerable than when it arrived. Chapter 10. The Wages of Rebellion. The mutiny begins, like most mutinies, with whispered conversations in dark corners of the ship. It's been building since the island, fed by dissatisfaction with Redbeard's leadership and Iron Tom's growing ambition to replace him. The immediate cause is a failed raid on a Portuguese merchant ship that cost the crew 3 dead and yielded almost no plunder. Redbeard's intelligence was wrong. The ship carried mostly raw materials worth little on the black market, and her crew fought with the desperation of men who knew surrender meant death. The real issue runs deeper. Redbeard has grown cautious with age and experience, preferring smaller targets and safer tactics. Iron Tom argues for bolder strikes against richer prizes, claiming the captain's timidity is costing the crew fortune and glory. The philosophical divide represents a fundamental tension in pirate society. Conservative leadership might keep more men alive, but it also meant smaller shares and less spectacular success. Aggressive tactics could yield enormous profits, but at the cost of higher casualties and greater risk of attracting naval attention. You find yourself caught in the middle, approached by both sides for support. Redbeard offers you a position as bosun if you remain loyal to his leadership. Iron Tom promises a double share of the next prize if you support his bid for command. Both men make it clear that neutrality isn't an option. The crew splits roughly evenly, with about 30 men supporting each faction. Those numbers shift daily as men calculate their odds of survival under different leadership. Some support whoever seems most likely to win, others back the leader they think will best protect their interests. The tension becomes unbearable. Men sleep with weapons close and watch their backs constantly. Meal times become exercises in paranoia as crew members wonder if their food has been poisoned by enemies. Simple disputes over work assignments escalate into near violence. The crisis comes to a head during a storm that requires all hands to save the ship. As waves crash over the deck and wind threatens to tear the sails apart, the crew must choose between factional loyalty and collective survival. Iron Tom uses the moment to make his move, challenging Redbeard's orders in front of the entire crew. "The old man's lost his nerve," he shouts over the howling wind. "Follow me if you want to live through this." About half the crew obeys Tom's counter orders, creating chaos as 2 different sets of commands are shouted simultaneously. Ropes are hauled in opposite directions, sails are adjusted conflictingly. The ship responds sluggishly to contradictory inputs, wallowing dangerously in the heavy seas. That's when the wave hits, a monster that towers above the mainmast before crashing down with the force of divine judgment. Water floods the deck, sweeping away anything not securely fastened. 3 men disappear instantly, including Whistling Ned, who'd shared your hammock space since your first night aboard. The near disaster forces a temporary truce as both factions work desperately to save the ship. But once the storm passes and the immediate crisis ends, the underlying conflict resurfaces with renewed intensity. Redbeard calls for a formal vote of confidence, as specified in the articles. The entire crew gathers on deck while the 2 candidates make their cases. Redbeard emphasizes his experience and the crew's survival under his leadership. Iron Tom promises wealth and glory for those bold enough to seize them. The vote is conducted by secret ballot, with each man dropping a marked stone into one of two barrels. The count reveals Iron Tom as the winner by a margin of just 4 votes, close enough to suggest the crew's deep division will continue under new leadership. Redbeard accepts defeat with dignity, stepping down without violence and pledging his support to the new captain. It's a rare example of peaceful transition in pirate politics, though the underlying tensions remain unresolved. Iron Tom's first act as captain is to promote his supporters to key positions while demoting or marginalizing Redbeard's allies. You find yourself caught in the middle, neither trusted by the new regime nor entirely condemned by it. The new captain immediately sets course for hunting grounds where Spanish treasure ships are rumored to travel. His bold agenda appeals to crew members hungry for spectacular prizes, but you notice that several of the ship's more experienced sailors seem quietly concerned about the risks involved. Chapter 11. The Captain's Gambit Iron. Tom's first major decision as captain nearly destroys the crew before it can prove or disprove his leadership. Word reaches the ship through tavern gossip in Port Royal that a Spanish treasure galleon, the Santa Isabella, will be sailing from Cartagena to Cadiz with a cargo worth more than most pirates see in a lifetime. The intelligence seems solid, confirmed by 3 different sources, including a bribed Spanish dock worker. The ship carries silver from the mines of Peru, gold from New Granada, and precious stones from various colonial sources. Her escort consists of just 2 smaller warships, supposedly undermanned due to yellow fever outbreaks in Cartagena. It sounds too good to be true, which is exactly what Redbeard mutters during the planning session, but Iron Tom is committed to proving his leadership through a spectacular success, and the crew is hungry for the kind of prize that could set them up for life. The plan is audacious, bordering on suicidal. The treasure galleon will be heavily armed and well defended. Despite her escort's weakness, she'll be sailing in well-patrolled waters where Spanish naval forces can respond quickly to distress signals. Most critically, attacking such a high-value target will bring down the full wrath of the Spanish colonial administration, but the potential rewards are staggering. If successful, each crew member's share would equal several years' income from safer piracy. More importantly for Tom's leadership, success would prove his approach superior to Redbeard's cautious methods. Preparations consume weeks of careful planning and positioning. The ship's armament is upgraded with additional cannon purchased through Tortuga's black market. Extra gunpowder and shot are acquired, along with medical supplies for the expected casualties. The crew's weapons are sharpened, cleaned, and blessed by those inclined toward religious observance. You find yourself assigned to one of the boarding parties, a position that reflects either growing trust in your abilities or Iron Tom's willingness to risk the lives of potentially unreliable crew members. Either way, you'll be among the first to face Spanish steel when the fighting begins. The interception takes place in the Windward Passage, where Spanish ships must navigate between Cuba and Hispaniola. The Wicked Mary lies in wait behind a small island, using its bulk to hide from passing vessels, while lookouts watch for the distinctive silhouette of a treasure galleon. The Santa Isabella appears at dawn on the 3rd day, exactly as intelligence predicted. She's larger than expected, a massive ship of the line that dwarfs anything the pirates have faced. Her escort consists of 2 frigates sailing in formation, their gun ports open and ready for action. "Jesus Christ," mutters Dead-Eye Dan, studying the ships through his spyglass. "That's not a treasure galleon, that's a floating fortress." Iron Tom refuses to call off the attack, despite the obviously increased danger. His leadership is already being questioned by crew members who remember Redbeard's more cautious approach. Backing down now would destroy his authority before it's fully established. "We knew she'd be well defended," he he announces to the assembled crew. "But look how deep she sits in the water. That's millions in silver weighing her down. Are we pirates or cowards?" The question is rhetorical, but effective. Pirates pride themselves on courage, even suicidal courage, and no one wants to be branded a coward by his peers. The crew votes to proceed with the attack despite obvious reservations from the more experienced sailors. The battle begins with the Wicked Mary emerging from her hiding place and racing toward the Spanish formation at full speed. The plan calls for closing quickly before the larger ships can bring their superior firepower to bear effectively. It goes wrong immediately. The Spanish ships aren't surprised. Their formation suggests they were expecting trouble, possibly warned by the same intelligence network that informed the pirates. The escort frigates wheel into position to intercept, while the treasure galleon begins a fighting withdrawal. The first exchange of cannon fire demonstrates the disparity in firepower. The Spanish frigates mount 18-pound guns compared to the pirates' 12-pounders, and their crews are professional naval gunners rather than improvised pirates. Their shots hit consistently, while many of the pirate shots miss entirely. Within minutes, the Wicked Mary has taken severe damage. Her foremast is down, her hull is holed in 3 places above the waterline, and her crew is taking casualties faster than Sawbones McGillicuddy can treat them. But Iron Tom's plan has one advantage: desperation breeds ferocity. The pirate crew fights with the fury of men who know retreat means death or capture. They close with one of the frigates despite taking murderous fire, and their boarding action succeeds through sheer, savage determination. You find yourself fighting Spanish Marines on their own deck, cutlass against cutlass, with no quarter asked or given. The Spanish fight with professional skill, but the pirates fight with berserker rage, born from knowing they're probably going to die anyway. The Spanish frigate falls after a brutal close-quarters battle that leaves her deck awash in blood. But the victory comes at a terrible cost. Half the pirate crew is dead or wounded, and the Wicked Mary is barely seaworthy. The treasure galleon escapes while the pirates are engaged with her escort, taking her millions in silver beyond their reach. Chapter 12. The Reckoning. The aftermath of the failed treasure hunt reveals the true cost of Iron Tom's ambitious leadership. 28 men are dead, including some of the crew's most experienced sailors. Another 15 are wounded badly enough to be permanently disabled. The ship herself needs extensive repairs that will consume most of the gold remaining from previous raids. The crew's mood swings from post-battle euphoria to bitter recrimination as the reality sinks in. They captured 1 Spanish frigate and her cargo, but the prize barely covers the cost of the attack. Worse, they've made themselves targets for Spanish retribution by attacking such a high-profile convoy. Iron Tom tries to maintain morale by emphasizing the glory of their victory over professional naval forces, but the crew is more interested in practical concerns like survival and profit. Glory doesn't pay for ship repairs or feed hungry families in port. The recriminations begin during the voyage to a safe harbor for repairs. Crew members who supported the attack now claim they were pressured into agreement. Others argue that better intelligence or different tactics could have secured the treasure galleon. A few openly call for Iron Tom's removal as captain. The divisions that plagued the ship before the attack have deepened into irreconcilable factions. Tom's supporters blame the failure on cowardice and poor execution rather than flawed strategy. His opponents point to the casualties and near destruction of the ship as proof of incompetent leadership. You find yourself caught between these factions, trusted by neither but not entirely condemned by either. Your performance during the boarding action earned respect from the crew, but your initial reluctance to support Iron Tom's leadership makes his faction suspicious of your loyalty. The crisis comes to a head when Spanish warships appear on the horizon. 3 ships of the line flying the flag of the Armada de Barlovento, Spain's anti-piracy fleet. Word of the attack on the treasure convoy has clearly reached Spanish authorities, and they've responded with overwhelming force. The Wicked Mary is in no condition to fight or outrun such powerful opponents. Her damage from the previous battle has reduced her speed significantly, and her depleted crew lacks the manpower to operate efficiently under pressure. Surrender seems like the only rational option. But surrender to Spanish forces means death for everyone aboard. Spain doesn't take pirates prisoner, they execute them publicly as examples to discourage others. The crew faces a choice between hopeless battle and certain execution. Iron Tom rises to the occasion, displaying the leadership qualities that originally made him quartermaster under Redbeard. He rallies the crew for a fighting withdrawal, using every trick of seamanship and warfare to stay ahead of the pursuing Spanish ships. The chase lasts 3 days and nights, with the damaged pirate ship somehow maintaining just enough distance to avoid capture. The crew works with desperate efficiency, knowing that any mistake will mean death for all of them. You find yourself assigned to damage control, leading a team that plugs holes, reinforces weakened timbers, and keeps the ship from sinking despite taking hits from long-range Spanish cannon fire. It's exhausting work performed under constant threat of death, but it's also oddly satisfying to use your skills in defense of your crewmates. The escape succeeds through a combination of seamanship, luck, and weather. A sudden squall provides cover for the Wicked Mary to slip away from her pursuers, leaving the Spanish ships searching empty ocean while the pirates limp toward sanctuary. But the victory is Pyrrhic. The ship needs months of repairs before she'll be seaworthy again. The crew's casualties mean everyone must work harder just to maintain basic operations. Most critically, the Spanish attention means they can no longer operate in their traditional hunting grounds. Iron Tom's leadership survives the crisis, but his authority is permanently weakened. The crew respects his skill in getting them out of a desperate situation, but they also blame him for creating that situation in the first place. Future decisions will require more consultation and consensus building than his aggressive style naturally permits. Chapter 13. The Haunted Ship. The Wicked Mary limps into Devil's Cove, a hidden harbour on the north coast of Jamaica, known only to smugglers and pirates. The natural protection of coral reefs and hidden entrances makes it ideal for ships that can't risk entering legitimate ports, but the isolation comes with its own dangers. The cove serves multiple pirate crews as a repair station and supply depot, but it's not a friendly place. Competition for resources and services can turn deadly, and the absence of any legal authority means disputes are settled through violence or the threat of violence. Your ship's arrival creates immediate tension with the crews already there. The Devil's Revenge, under Captain Skullface Morgan, has been using the cove's careening beach to scrape barnacles from her hull. The Bloody Rose, commanded by the notorious Anne Storm, has been taking on water and supplies at the main dock. Both crews eye the damaged Wicked Mary with predatory interest. Damaged ships with depleted crews are vulnerable to being overwhelmed and absorbed by stronger forces. Your ship's remaining cargo and weapons would be valuable prizes for pirates willing to take them by force. Iron Tom must negotiate carefully to secure the time and space needed for repairs without appearing weak enough to invite attack. The process involves a complex dance of diplomacy, bribery, and implied threats that could escalate to open warfare at any moment. You're assigned to help with the careening process, the dangerous procedure of pulling the ship onto the beach and tilting her over to expose the hull below the waterline for repairs. It's backbreaking work that requires careful coordination to avoid crushing anyone under the massive weight of the vessel. The work reveals the full extent of damage from the Spanish battle. Cannonballs have punched holes completely through the hull in several places. The keel is cracked, where the ship grounded briefly during the escape. Most of the rigging needs replacement, and several masts require major repairs. But the physical damage is nothing compared to the psychological toll. Living so close to death has changed everyone aboard in ways that become apparent during the forced intimacy of shore repairs. Men who seemed steady during battle now jump at unexpected sounds. Others who appeared cowardly prove to have hidden reserves of courage. Sore bones. McGillicuddy works around the clock, treating wounds that won't heal properly in the tropical climate. Infections fester in the heat and humidity. Broken bones set crooked due to lack of proper splints and medical supplies. Several men develop fevers that resist all treatment. The dead haunt the ship in ways both literal and metaphorical. Their hammocks hang empty, swaying with the ship's movement like ghostly reminders of mortality. Their personal belongings must be distributed among survivors, creating uncomfortable reminders of friendship and loss. Some crew members report seeing dead comrades in peripheral vision or hearing their voices during night watches. Whether these are genuine supernatural manifestations or stress-induced hallucinations hardly matters. Their effect on morale is equally destructive. The isolation of Devil's Cove intensifies these psychological pressures. Cut off from the outside world, with no entertainment beyond drinking and gambling, the crew turns inward on itself. Old grievances resurface, new conflicts develop over trivial matters. The constant proximity breeds contempt and paranoia. You find yourself taking on additional responsibilities as attrition reduces the crew's effective strength. Men who were once subordinates now look to you for leadership in specialized tasks. The promotion is unofficial but real, marking your complete transformation from pressed victim to pirate officer. The change brings new perspectives on the crew's dynamics. You see how carefully Iron Tom must balance competing factions and personalities. You understand the constant vigilance required to maintain discipline without provoking rebellion. You appreciate the loneliness of command in a society where authority depends on the consent of heavily armed subordinates. Repairs take 3 months, far longer than initially planned. Parts must be fabricated from scratch or salvaged from other ships. Skilled craftsmen demand premium payments for work performed in such a dangerous location. Every delay increases the risk of Spanish forces tracking the ship to its hiding place. The extended stay also allows time for reflection on the path that brought you here. A year ago, you were an honest merchant sailor with simple dreams and modest ambitions. Now you're a pirate officer with blood on your hands and a price on your head, living in a world where violence is routine and death is always close. The transformation feels both gradual and sudden. A series of small compromises that accumulated into fundamental change. Each decision seemed reasonable at the time, but their cumulative effect has been to carry you far from anything resembling your former life. Chapter 14. The Point of No Return. The Wicked Mary finally departs Devil's Cove with a patched hull, jury-rigged repairs, and a crew reduced to fewer than 40 men. She's seaworthy again, but no longer the proud predator that once terrorized Spanish shipping. The battle scars and hasty repairs give her the appearance of a wounded animal limping away from a fatal encounter. Iron Tom's leadership has stabilized during the repair period, but his authority rests on increasingly shaky foundations. The crew respects his skill in combat and seamanship, but they question his strategic judgment after the costly failure against the treasure convoy. The immediate problem is economic. The crew needs money for food, weapons, and basic supplies, but their traditional hunting grounds are now heavily patrolled by Spanish warships. They must choose between taking enormous risks in familiar waters or moving to new areas where they lack intelligence and contacts. Tom chooses expansion, leading the ship toward the Carolinas, where English and Dutch merchant traffic offers different opportunities. The decision makes strategic sense but requires learning new patterns of trade, different seasonal schedules, and unfamiliar political complications. The transition proves more difficult than expected. Caribbean piracy operates according to well-established customs and relationships built over decades. Colonial merchants know which officials can be bribed, which ports will accept stolen goods, and which crews can be trusted to honor agreements. None of those relationships exist in the northern colonies, where pirates are less common and correspondingly less tolerated. Local authorities are more likely to resist rather than accommodate pirate activities. Merchants are less experienced in dealing with stolen goods and more suspicious of obvious pirates. Your first raid in colonial waters targets a Virginia tobacco ship bound for London. The cargo is valuable but bulky, difficult to transport and sell quickly. Worse, the ship's captain recognizes Iron Tom from previous encounters, making it impossible to maintain the anonymity that successful piracy requires. Within days of the raid, wanted posters appear in every port from Charleston to Boston, describing the Wicked Mary and her officers in uncomfortable detail. The descriptions are accurate enough to make entering any legitimate harbor extremely dangerous. The crew's morale drops as they realize they've become fugitives in waters they don't understand. Food runs low as they're forced to avoid settlements where supplies might be purchased. Fresh water becomes scarce without access to reliable sources on shore. Desperation drives them to increasingly reckless acts. They attack fishing vessels for food, gaining almost nothing while adding to their reputation for violence. They raid isolated plantations for supplies, leaving behind witnesses who can identify them to pursuing authorities. The psychological pressure of constant pursuit takes its toll on everyone aboard. Men who once joked and sang now sit in sullen silence. Arguments break out over minor issues and escalate quickly to violence. Several crew members desert during night raids, preferring to take their chances on land rather than continue the increasingly hopeless voyage. You find yourself part of Iron Tom's inner circle by default, as attrition eliminates more senior officers. The responsibility is both flattering and terrifying. You're now partially responsible for decisions that could mean life or death for everyone aboard. The position also provides insight into Tom's growing desperation. He knows the crew is losing confidence in his leadership but can't see any alternative that doesn't involve surrender or death. His attempts to maintain morale through bravado and promises of future success ring increasingly hollow. The crisis comes when colonial militia forces corner the ship in a small bay while the crew is taking on fresh water. Unlike European naval forces, these colonial troops are familiar with local conditions and tactics. They've positioned themselves to prevent escape while waiting for reinforcements to arrive by sea. The militia commander offers terms: surrender immediately and face trial in colonial courts rather than summary execution. It's not much of an offer, but it's more mercy than Spanish forces would show. Several crew members advocate accepting rather than facing hopeless battle against overwhelming odds. Iron Tom refuses to consider surrender, knowing it would mean death or lifelong imprisonment for the ship's officers. But his refusal sparks the open rebellion that's been building since the treasure ship disaster. Nearly half the remaining crew declares they'd rather take their chances with colonial justice than die fighting hopeless odds. The mutiny is swift and decisive. Led by Deadeye Dan and several of the crew's most experienced sailors, the rebels seize control of the ship's weapons and demand Tom's immediate surrender of command. It's not a democratic vote according to the articles. It's a military coup driven by desperation and the instinct for survival. You face an impossible choice. Support Tom's defiant last stand and probably die fighting colonial militia, or join the mutiny against the captain who promoted you and trust your fate to colonial courts that have no reason to show mercy to pirates. The decision is made for you when Tom draws his pistol and declares he'll kill any man who tries to surrender his ship. Deadeye Dan responds by putting a musket ball through Tom's chest, ending the standoff with brutal finality. "Anyone else want to die for glory?" Dan asks the stunned crew, reloading his weapon with practiced calm. The silence that follows provides its own answer. Chapter 15. The Devil's Bargain. The surrender negotiations reveal the complexity of colonial attitudes toward piracy. The militia commander, Colonel Harrison, is a practical man more interested in political advancement than abstract justice. He needs victories to report to the colonial governor, but he also needs information about Spanish activities in the region. Pirates, it turns out, make excellent intelligence sources, and their movements throughout the Caribbean give them knowledge of Spanish naval dispositions, fortifications, and shipping schedules that colonial authorities desperately want. The question becomes whether this information is valuable enough to outweigh the political benefits of public executions. Harrison offers a devil's bargain: cooperation in exchange for transportation to a neutral port rather than immediate trial and execution. It's not freedom, but it's life, which is more than any of you expected when the militia ships appeared on the horizon. Deadeye Dan, now acting as the crew's spokesman, negotiates carefully. He provides enough information to demonstrate value while holding back details that might compromise other pirate crews still at sea. The discussions continue for days while the crew waits in improvised prison holds aboard the militia ships. You're selected as one of the crew members to be questioned individually, partly because your relatively recent recruitment makes you seem more likely to cooperate, partly because your education makes you more useful as a source of written intelligence. The interrogation reveals how much you've changed during your year of piracy. Colonel Harrison's questions about Spanish ship movements, fortification layouts, and naval patrol schedules are answered automatically without conscious thought. You've absorbed this information through daily exposure without realizing its intelligence value. More disturbing is your emotional detachment from the information you're providing. Revealing Spanish naval weaknesses will cost lives when colonial forces act on the intelligence, but you feel no guilt about potential consequences. The Spanish are simply enemies whose defeat might benefit your own survival. The moral numbness that developed gradually during months of piracy now reveals itself fully. You can discuss tactics for attacking merchant vessels, methods for extracting information from prisoners, and techniques for intimidating civilian populations without emotional reaction. These have become technical subjects rather than moral issues. Harrison recognizes this detachment as a valuable asset. Agents who lack emotional involvement in their work are more reliable than those driven by ideology or personal vendetta. He begins hinting at opportunities for continued service that would provide both income and legal protection. The offer is seductive and terrifying in equal measure. Colonial intelligence work would mean regular pay, respectable cover identity, and freedom from the constant danger of pirate life. But it would also mean permanent separation from any possibility of returning to legitimate society. More immediately, acceptance would require betraying other pirate crews who might consider you allies or at least neutral parties. The intelligence you could provide would lead directly to attacks on ships carrying men who shared risks and hardships with you during your time aboard the Wicked Mary. The decision is complicated by practical considerations. Refusal might mean trial and execution, despite the informal agreements Harrison has hinted at. Colonial justice is unpredictable, influenced by political pressures and popular opinion that generally favors harsh punishment for pirates. But acceptance means crossing a line from which there's no return. Pirates who turn informant become pariahs among their former associates, targets for assassination who can never safely return to the communities that once sheltered them. You're given 3 days to consider the offer while the militia prepares to transport the crew to Charleston for formal processing. The time passes slowly in the humid confines of the prison hold, surrounded by men who face the same impossible choice between collaboration and probable death. Some crew members have already decided to accept whatever terms are offered, reasoning that any life is better than no life at all. Others maintain they'd rather hang as pirates than live as traitors, though their resolve might weaken when faced with actual gallows rather than abstract principles. A few, including yourself, remain genuinely torn between survival and loyalty, unsure which choice represents greater dishonor. The moral frameworks that might guide such decisions have been eroded by months of violence and moral compromise, leaving only pragmatic calculations about personal advantage. Chapter 16. The Price of Survival. Your decision comes at dawn on the 3rd day when Harrison arrives to collect final answers from the crew. Standing in the makeshift prison hold surrounded by men who've shared dangers and hardships, you realize that survival often requires betraying everything you once believed about honor and loyalty. "I'll provide the information you want," you tell Harrison quietly, avoiding eye contact with your former crewmates. "But I want guaranteed safe passage to a neutral port, and enough money to start over somewhere the Spanish can't find me." Harrison nods approvingly. "Practical man, you'll do well in intelligence work if you choose to continue." The implication is clear. This cooperation is intended as a trial run for more extensive collaboration. 12 of the crew make similar agreements, while the remaining 15 maintain their defiance despite facing almost certain execution. The division creates immediate tension as those who chose cooperation are branded as traitors by those who refused to compromise. The accusations hurt more than you expected, partly because they're accurate. You are betraying men who trusted you, abandoning principles you once considered important, and choosing personal survival over collective loyalty. But the alternative is death, and death resolves no moral dilemmas. The intelligence debriefing takes place aboard Harrison's flagship during the voyage to Charleston. You provide detailed information about Spanish naval patrols, fortification weaknesses, and merchant shipping schedules that will undoubtedly cost lives when acted upon. More personally damaging is the information about other pirate crews, their bases, capabilities, and likely future activities. Some of these men were friends or at least friendly acquaintances. Others were enemies, but enemies who operated under the same code that once protected you. Harrison is particularly interested in the political divisions among pirate crews, information that could be exploited to turn them against each other. Your insights into leadership disputes, territorial conflicts, and personal grudges provide tools for manipulation that could destroy entire communities of pirates. The moral weight of this betrayal settles slowly, like sediment in disturbed water. Each piece of information feels insignificant individually, but their cumulative effect will be measured in destroyed lives and broken communities. You're helping to eliminate a way of life that, despite its dangers and moral compromises, offered freedom unavailable anywhere else in the colonial world. But survival requires compartmentalizing these concerns, focusing on immediate practical benefits rather than long-term consequences. You tell yourself that piracy was doomed anyway, that Spanish and English naval forces would eventually eliminate it with or without your assistance. The rationalization feels hollow even as you construct it. You know that intelligence work will require continued betrayals, each one making the next easier until treachery becomes as natural as breathing. The path you're choosing leads toward moral emptiness disguised as pragmatic necessity. Charleston's harbor appears through morning mist, like a vision of civilization rising from chaos. The city represents order, law, and the possibility of legitimate existence, everything you've been separated from during your pirate career. But it also represents judgment, both legal and moral, for the choices you've made. The crew is separated upon arrival, with those who agreed to cooperate receiving different treatment from those who maintained their defiance. You're housed in comfortable quarters rather than prison cells, fed decent food, and allowed limited freedom to move around the city under escort. The contrast with your former crewmates' treatment is stark and intentional. They're confined in dank cells, fed prison slop, and prepared for public trial that will likely end in public execution. The difference in treatment serves both as reward for cooperation and warning about the consequences of continued resistance. You attend their trial as a witness for the prosecution, providing testimony about their activities that help secure convictions for piracy, murder, and theft. Watching men you sailed with receive death sentences based partly on your testimony completes your transformation from pirate to collaborator. The executions take place on a bright Tuesday morning, attended by crowds who come to see pirates die. You watch from a distance as 15 men who once shared your dangers and hardships are hanged from gallows overlooking Charleston Harbor. Some die defiantly, cursing the colonial authorities and proclaiming their loyalty to the pirate code. Others break at the end, weeping and begging for mercy that won't come. All die because they chose honor over survival, while you chose the opposite. Chapter 17. The Informant's Trade. 6 months after the trial, you've established yourself as one of Colonel Harrison's most valuable intelligence assets. Your cover identity as a legitimate merchant provides access to docks, taverns, and other places where information about pirate activities can be gathered without suspicion. The work pays well, better than honest seamanship ever did, and with considerably less physical danger. You live in a comfortable apartment, wear respectable clothes, and maintain the appearance of a successful trader conducting business throughout the Caribbean. But success in intelligence work requires skills that were never taught in any school. You learn to drink heavily without revealing information, to ask questions that seem casual while gathering specific data, and to betray confidences while maintaining the appearance of trustworthiness. Most importantly, you learn to manage the multiple identities that the work requires. To colonial authorities, you're a loyal agent providing valuable service. To the merchants and sailors you gather information from, you're a fellow trader interested in mutual profit. To yourself, you try to remain someone who can justify the betrayals necessary for survival. The psychological toll accumulates gradually. Each report you file leads to raids that capture or kill men who might have been friends under different circumstances. Every piece of intelligence about pirate activities helps colonial forces eliminate communities that once offered sanctuary to people like yourself. The moral isolation is as complete as physical exile. You can't confess your true activities to civilian acquaintances without destroying your cover identity. You can't seek fellowship among intelligence colleagues without revealing vulnerabilities that could be exploited. You can't return to pirate society without facing assassination as a known traitor. Your handlers recognize this isolation as useful for their purposes. Agents without external loyalties or emotional attachments are more reliable than those with competing allegiances. They encourage your alienation while providing just enough material comfort to prevent desperation. The work itself becomes routine after the first few operations. You identify potential targets, gather intelligence about their capabilities and plans, and report to handlers who plan raids based on your information. The process is methodical and impersonal, like any other business transaction, but the routine nature of betrayal makes it more disturbing rather than less. Murder committed in passion might be forgivable, but systematic treachery carried out for salary reveals character flaws that can't be blamed on circumstances or desperation. You begin to understand why experienced intelligence operatives often seem emotionally dead. Constant betrayal erodes the capacity for genuine human connection, leaving only the ability to simulate friendship for professional purposes. Trust becomes impossible when you know how easily it can be violated for the right price. The Spanish authorities eventually identify you as a colonial agent, though they can't prove it sufficiently to take direct action. Instead, they begin feeding false information through channels they know you monitor, using your reports to mislead colonial military planners about Spanish naval activities. The counterintelligence game adds another layer of complexity to work that was already morally exhausting. Now you must evaluate the reliability of sources who may be deliberately deceiving you while maintaining cover with people who increasingly suspect your true role. Harrison warns you that Spanish agents may attempt assassination rather than continuing the information war indefinitely. The threat is credible. Several colonial agents have disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances in recent months. Your usefulness may not be worth the risk if Spanish pressure makes your position untenable. The warning forces consideration of options you've avoided confronting. Continued intelligence work offers security and income, but at increasing personal risk and moral cost. Retirement might be possible with careful planning and sufficient accumulated resources, but leaving intelligence work alive requires the permission of handlers who prefer to eliminate potential security risks rather than hope for continued discretion. Chapter 18: The Ghosts of Conscience. 2 years into your intelligence career, the past catches up with you in the form of a familiar face across a crowded Charleston tavern. Scarface Sally, the bosun who taught you seamanship aboard the Wicked Mary, sits in a dark corner nursing rum and studying you with cold calculation. Your blood turns to ice as you realize she's recognized you, despite your respectable merchant's disguise. Sally survived the militia attack that destroyed your former crew, probably by swimming ashore during the final chaos and disappearing into the colonial wilderness like so many other pirates who chose exile over surrender. The recognition is mutual and immediate. Sally's scarred face shows no emotion, but her hand moves casually to rest on the knife at her belt. She knows you're the traitor whose testimony helped hang 15 of her former crewmates. And the only question is whether she plans to collect the bounty on your head immediately or follow you to learn more about your current activities. You finish your drink with forced calm while evaluating escape routes and calculating odds. Sally is older and slower than she once was, but she's also more experienced and certainly more desperate. A knife fight in a crowded tavern would attract attention that could destroy your cover identity, even if you survived the encounter. The standoff continues for several minutes, with both parties assessing the situation while maintaining the appearance of casual tavern patrons. Other customers continue their conversations, oblivious to the deadly tension across the room. Sally makes her move when you rise to leave, following at a distance that's close enough to prevent escape, but far enough to avoid immediate confrontation. The cat-and-mouse game continues through Charleston's evening streets, with each party maneuvering for advantage while avoiding open conflict. You lead her away from populated areas toward the docks, where darkness might provide cover for whatever resolution seems inevitable. The narrow alleys and maze-like warehouse district offer opportunities for ambush that could benefit either hunter or prey. The confrontation comes in a deserted warehouse where moonlight streams through broken windows to illuminate bales of cotton and tobacco waiting for shipment. Sally emerges from the shadows with her knife drawn, moving with the careful economy of someone who's survived many such encounters. "Thomas Wright," she says, using the name you went by aboard the Wicked Mary. Or should I call you by whatever merchant name you're using these days? Funny thing, I hear tell there's a colonial agent been selling information about pirate crews to the authorities, getting good men killed with his reports. You draw your own blade while backing toward what appears to be a clear exit route. People hear lots of things that aren't true, Sally. Maybe you should be more careful about believing rumors. Her laugh is bitter and humorless. Rumors? I got friends who saw you at the trial giving testimony that put ropes around good men's necks. I got sources tell me you've been meeting regular with Colonel Harrison and his intelligence officers. That sound like rumors to you? The accusation hangs in the air between you like smoke from a discharged pistol. Denial seems pointless when confronted with accurate intelligence, but admission could be equally dangerous. Sally might be working alone, or she might be part of a larger pirate network seeking revenge against colonial informants. Survival makes strange choices necessary, you finally admit, keeping your blade ready while testing her intentions. Dead pirates don't help anybody, but live ones who cooperate might save some crews by providing warnings about planned operations. Pretty words? Sally spits, but 15 men are dead because of information you provided. Good sailors who deserved better than dancing on colonial ropes while their former shipmate counted his blood money. The guilt you've spent months suppressing suddenly floods back with overwhelming force. Those 15 men trusted you as a crewmate, shared their food during storms, risked their lives to save yours during battles. Their faces appear in memory with perfect clarity, making the abstract moral compromises of intelligence work suddenly personal and immediate. But guilt doesn't alter present reality. Sally clearly intends violence regardless of your emotional state, and survival still requires immediate action rather than philosophical reflection. The knife fight that follows is brutal, desperate, and mercifully brief. Sally's experience gives her initial advantage, but years of comfortable intelligence work have made you softer, while hardship has left her weakened by poor nutrition and untreated injuries. When it ends, she lies still on the warehouse floor while you stand over her body with blood on your hands and fresh wounds that will require explanation. Chapter 19. The Unraveling. Sally's death forces immediate changes to your intelligence activities. A presence in Charleston suggests that other pirates may know about your treachery and could be planning their own revenge operations. The network of informants and collaborators that seemed secure suddenly feels exposed to retaliation from multiple directions. Colonel Harrison receives the news with professional calm, but you can see him calculating the security implications of having an exposed agent whose usefulness may no longer justify the risks. Intelligence handlers are ruthlessly practical about protecting their operations, and compromised assets often find themselves abandoned or eliminated to prevent further exposure. We'll need to extract you temporarily while we assess the security situation, Harrison announces during an emergency meeting. There are safe houses in Virginia where you can wait until we determine whether your cover identity can be salvaged. The offer sounds reasonable but carries implications that make your blood run cold. Intelligence operations don't maintain expensive safe houses for the benefit of compromised agents. They maintain them for interrogation, debriefing, and disposal when necessary. Extraction might mean safety, or it might mean a more controlled form of elimination. But refusing Harrison's protection would leave you completely exposed to pirate retaliation while eliminating any possibility of continued colonial support. The choice between probable death and possible survival isn't really a choice at all. The journey to Virginia takes place aboard a fast sloop crewed by colonial agents rather than regular sailors. The crew's professional competence and casual attitude toward weapons suggests they're prepared for combat, with pirates who might attempt to intercept their valuable cargo. You spend the voyage in a comfortable cabin that's locked from the outside, supposedly for security purposes. The accommodation feels more like luxurious imprisonment than protective custody, complete with meals delivered at regular intervals and guards who maintain polite but firm control over your movements. The safe house proves to be an isolated plantation house surrounded by woods and accessible only by a single road that can be easily monitored. The location provides perfect security against external threats, while making escape equally impossible if the colonial authorities decide you've become a liability. Your handler at the safe house introduces himself as Major Phillips, a soft-spoken man whose gentle manner conceals obvious competence in matters requiring violence. He explains that you'll be debriefed thoroughly while security analysts determine how much damage Sally's recognition might have caused to other operations. The debriefing process reveals how extensively your intelligence work has compromised pirate operations throughout the Caribbean. Every report you filed, every piece of information you provided, and every contact you developed becomes part of a comprehensive analysis designed to identify other potential security breaches. More disturbingly, the debriefing uncovers evidence that Spanish counterintelligence services have been aware of your activities for months. They've been feeding false information through some of your sources while gathering intelligence about colonial operations through others. Your effectiveness as an agent has been compromised far longer than anyone realized. Major Phillips presents this information with clinical detachment, but the implications are clear. You've been serving as an unwitting double agent, providing the Spanish with insights into colonial intelligence methods while receiving misleading information in return. The damage to colonial operations could be extensive and long-lasting. The question now, Phillips explains over dinner, on your third day at the safe house, is whether you represent a salvageable asset or an unacceptable security risk. That determination will influence our recommendations about your future arrangements. The euphemistic language doesn't disguise the underlying threat. Intelligence organizations don't relocate compromised agents to comfortable retirement. They eliminate them to prevent further damage. Your survival depends on convincing handlers that you remain more valuable alive than dead. You spend sleepless nights calculating your odds and planning escape routes from a facility designed to prevent exactly such attempts. The surrounding wilderness offers potential concealment, but you lack wilderness survival skills and have no clear destination where colonial or Spanish agents couldn't eventually locate you. More fundamentally, the moral isolation that began with your first betrayals has now become complete physical isolation as well. Every person you encounter represents either a potential threat or someone whose trust you might need to violate for survival. The capacity for genuine human connection has been eroded beyond recovery. The decision about your fate arrives on the seventh day in the form of new orders from Charleston. Major Phillips delivers the news with characteristic understatement. You're being transferred to a more permanent facility where your expertise can be utilized in training new operatives. Translation: you'll be kept alive as long as your knowledge remains useful, then eliminated when your value diminishes sufficiently. It's reprieve rather than pardon. Temporary survival purchased with continued cooperation in activities that compromise whatever remains of your moral integrity. Chapter 20. The Training Ground for Treachery. The permanent facility proves to be an isolated compound on the Virginia frontier where colonial intelligence services train agents for operations throughout North America and the Caribbean. Your new role involves teaching betrayal as a professional skill to recruits who often arrive with moral qualms similar to those you once possessed. Or the irony isn't lost on you. The knowledge gained through systematic treachery now qualifies you to train others in the techniques that destroyed your own capacity for honest relationships. Your curriculum covers practical skills like maintaining cover identities, eliciting information without arousing suspicion, and managing the psychological pressures of double lives. But the most valuable lessons involve the mental processes that make betrayal possible. New recruits must learn to compartmentalize their emotions, rationalize moral compromises, and maintain operational effectiveness despite the guilt that comes with systematic deception. You become skilled at recognizing the personality types best suited for intelligence work. People with flexible moral frameworks, natural acting abilities, and the emotional detachment necessary for betraying human relationships on command. The recruitment process resembles selecting tools rather than choosing colleagues. The work provides stability and relative safety while utilizing skills that have no legitimate applications in civilian society. You're too valuable as a trainer to be eliminated casually, but too dangerous to be allowed genuine freedom. The arrangement suits handlers who need experienced instructors and satisfies your survival instincts while offering no possibility of moral redemption. Your students include pressed sailors who chose collaboration over execution, captured pirates seeking clemency through cooperation, and civilian volunteers attracted by pay and adventure. All arrive believing they can maintain their essential humanity while learning professional betrayal. Most discover that systematic treachery changes them in ways they didn't anticipate. The psychological techniques necessary for successful deception erode the capacity for authentic relationships, leaving only the ability to simulate human connection for professional purposes. You watch this transformation with the detached interest of someone who's already completed the journey. Each class follows predictable patterns: initial moral resistance, gradual accommodation to compromise, and eventual acceptance of treachery as normal professional behavior. The few students who refuse to abandon their moral frameworks wash out of training and disappear from the compound under circumstances that aren't discussed openly. The implication is clear. Intelligence work requires complete commitment to a moral pragmatism, and those unwilling to make that commitment represent security risks. Your reputation as an effective trainer brings opportunities for advancement within the intelligence community. Senior positions become available that would provide greater authority, better compensation, and increased protection from elimination as a security risk. But advancement requires deeper involvement in activities that complete your moral destruction. Training individual agents is different from planning operations that will cost hundreds of lives. The additional authority comes with responsibility for consequences that make your previous betrayals seem minor by comparison. The offer forces consideration of how far you're willing to descend into moral emptiness for the sake of physical survival. Each compromise has led to opportunities for greater compromise, creating a downward spiral that might continue indefinitely unless conscious choice interrupts the pattern. You realize that the colonial intelligence services have achieved perfect recruitment. They've transformed victims of circumstances into willing collaborators who recruit and train the next generation of agents. The system perpetuates itself by corrupting individuals until they become dependent on continued corruption for survival. Chapter 21, The Reckoning with History. 5 years after your recruitment aboard the Wicked Mary, you receive orders to participate in planning the largest anti-piracy operation in colonial history. Intelligence gathered by agents throughout the Caribbean will coordinate simultaneous raids designed to eliminate piracy as an organized threat to English and Dutch commerce. The operation represents the culmination of everything you've worked toward since becoming a colonial informant. Your reports about pirate bases, to supply networks and leadership structures form part of the intelligence foundation, supporting attacks that will finally bring effective law enforcement to waters that have been beyond governmental control. But success will require betraying not just individual pirates, but entire communities that exist outside conventional society. The raids will target not only active pirate crews, but also the merchants, craftsmen, and suppliers who form the economic ecosystem supporting piracy in places like Tortuga and Nassau. Your specific assignment involves providing detailed intelligence about Devil's Cove, the hidden harbour where the Wicked Mary underwent repairs years earlier. The information will enable colonial forces to surprise and destroy one of the most important pirate sanctuaries in the Caribbean, eliminating hundreds of people who consider it home. The moral weight of this assignment forces recognition of how completely you've been transformed by years of systematic betrayal. The man who was pressed into piracy with moral qualms about violence is now planning operations that will cause more death and suffering than anything he experienced as an active pirate. You find yourself reviewing old intelligence files, reading reports about pirate activities that you helped gather through methods that once seemed unthinkable. The cumulative effect of your work becomes clear. Thousands of lives disrupted, hundreds killed, entire communities destroyed through information you provided to handlers who rewarded treachery with survival. The realization brings neither guilt nor satisfaction, only a kind of hollow recognition that the person you once were no longer exists except in increasingly distant memories. The transformation from victim to victimizer is complete, leaving someone who's skilled at betrayal but incapable of any relationship requiring trust or loyalty. But the anti-piracy operation also presents opportunities for redemption that might not arise again. Warning pirate communities about planned raids would undo years of intelligence work while probably ensuring your own death, but it might also represent the first genuinely moral choice you've made since choosing survival over honor aboard that colonial militia ship. The decision requires calculating not just personal consequences, but historical ones. Piracy represents a form of freedom that doesn't exist elsewhere in the colonial world, violent and immoral, but also democratic and racially integrated in ways that legitimate society isn't. Its elimination might restore order to Caribbean commerce, but it will also eliminate opportunities for escaped slaves, discharged soldiers, and other social outcasts to create alternative communities. Your handlers have anticipated the possibility of last-minute conscience attacks among agents asked to participate in operations against their former associates. Security around the planning process has been increased, with agents monitored more closely for signs of divided loyalty or moral wavering, but your reputation as a reliable trainer and experienced operative provides access to information that junior agents wouldn't receive. The complete operational plan sits in a locked cabinet in your quarters, waiting to be transmitted to field commanders who will execute raids across the Caribbean simultaneously. The plan represents years of intelligence work by dozens of agents, many of whom faced moral choices similar to your own and chose survival over principle. Its successful implementation will validate the entire colonial intelligence program while demonstrating that systematic betrayal can achieve objectives beyond the reach of conventional military force. Failure of the operation due to security breaches would discredit intelligence methods and probably result in the elimination of agents suspected of disloyalty. But it might also preserve communities and ways of life that, despite their moral compromises, offer alternatives to the rigid hierarchies of colonial society. Chapter 22, The Choice That Defines Everything. The letter is written by candlelight in your quarters during the early hours of morning, when security patrols follow predictable schedules and the compound settles into temporary quiet. Your hands shake slightly as you transcribe operational details that represent years of intelligence work by dozens of agents. Each piece of information you record represents a betrayal of the colonial authorities who've kept you alive in exchange for systematic treachery. But withholding the information represents an even greater betrayal of the pirate communities whose trust you violated through years of intelligence gathering. The letter's recipient is Marcus Bellamy, a free black pirate captain who operates one of the most egalitarian crews in the Caribbean. You've met him twice during your intelligence career, once while maintaining cover as a merchant, once during a negotiation for prisoner exchanges that demonstrated his commitment to treating captives humanely. Bellamy represents what piracy could become if freed from its current brutality, a genuinely democratic alternative to colonial society's rigid hierarchies. His crew includes escaped slaves, discharged soldiers, and political refugees who've created a community based on shared risk rather than inherited privilege. Warning him about the planned raids won't prevent the anti-piracy operation entirely, but it might allow some communities to escape destruction while alerting others to the scope of colonial intelligence capabilities. And the information could save hundreds of lives while exposing the methods used to gather intelligence about pirate activities. But sending the letter means abandoning any possibility of survival within the colonial intelligence system. Your betrayal will be discovered eventually, probably within days of Bellamy receiving the warning. The consequences will include not just your own execution, but probably the elimination of other agents suspected of divided loyalties. The moral calculation seems clear until you consider the alternative. Remaining silent preserves your own life while enabling the destruction of entire communities whose only crimes were existing outside conventional society and resisting the authority of distant kings who never set foot in the Caribbean. The communities facing destruction include people like yourself, victims of circumstances who made compromises necessary for survival but retained some capacity for moral choice. Their elimination will remove alternatives to colonial society that might eventually evolve into something more humane than either current piracy or legitimate government. You complete the letter as dawn approaches, sealing it with wax that bears no identifying mark but carries the weight of a decision that will define whatever remains of your moral identity. The choice represents not redemption, too much betrayal has occurred for that, but at least resistance to the complete moral corruption that intelligence work demands. Getting the letter to Bellamy requires using intelligence networks for purposes they weren't designed to serve. Agents throughout the Caribbean maintain contact with merchant captains, tavern keepers, and other civilians who can carry messages between different islands. And the same networks that gather intelligence about pirate activities can deliver warnings about planned operations against them. The process involves multiple handoffs through contacts who don't know the letter's contents but can be trusted to deliver it safely. Each person who handles the message becomes an unwitting participant in what the colonial authorities will consider treasonous activity. You deliver the letter to the first contact during a routine intelligence meeting disguised as a merchant transaction. No words are exchanged beyond normal business pleasantries, but the sealed envelope disappears into a cargo shipment bound for Jamaica, beginning a journey that will either save lives or ensure your own destruction. The days following the letter's dispatch pass with excruciating slowness as you wait for signs that the warning has reached its destination. Normal intelligence activities continue, training sessions, operational planning, routine surveillance, but everything feels like performance masking the reality of your fundamental betrayal. Security procedures that once seemed reasonable now feel like preparation for your own capture. The locked compound that provided protection from pirate retaliation becomes a prison where your movements are monitored and your communications controlled. Every interaction with colleagues carries the possibility of exposure and immediate execution. Chapter 23. The Unraveling of Everything. The first sign that your warning has reached Marcus Bellamy comes 3 weeks later in the form of dramatically reduced intelligence from Caribbean sources. Pirates who previously operated according to predictable patterns suddenly become elusive, avoiding known bases and altering their normal routines in ways that suggest advanced knowledge of planned raids. Colonial military commanders express frustration at the apparent security leak, while intelligence handlers scramble to identify the source of compromised information. The investigation focuses initially on communication channels and field agents, following standard procedures for damage assessment when operations are exposed, but the scope of the intelligence breach suggests involvement by someone with access to comprehensive operational plans rather than specific tactical information. The suspect list narrows quickly to a handful of senior agents and training personnel who had access to complete intelligence packages. You maintain normal routines while watching colleagues disappear for enhanced debriefing sessions that often end with permanent reassignment to unspecified duties. The facility's atmosphere becomes increasingly paranoid as handlers struggle to identify the security breach while maintaining operational effectiveness. Major Phillips conducts your own interrogation with professional thoroughness, using techniques that blur the line between friendly conversation and hostile questioning. His approach assumes that everyone with access to sensitive information must be considered a potential security risk until proven otherwise. Interesting pattern in the intelligence reports, he observes during one session, spreading documents across his desk like playing cards. Pirates seem to be avoiding specific locations and activities that we've been monitoring, almost like someone provided them with detailed warnings about planned operations. Your response requires careful calibration between appearing helpful and avoiding self-incrimination. Intelligence work always involves some compromise. Maybe the Spanish counterintelligence services have been more successful than we realized at identifying and turning our sources. Phillips nods thoughtfully, making notes that might represent acceptance of your explanation or documentation of potentially incriminating statements. Intelligence interrogations are designed to be ambiguous, leaving subjects uncertain about whether their responses are helpful or damaging. The questioning continues for days, covering every aspect of your intelligence career with particular attention to recent activities and contacts. Phillips demonstrates detailed knowledge of your assignments, associations, and access to sensitive information that suggests the investigation has been thorough and ongoing, but no direct accusations are made, and you're allowed to return to normal duties between interrogation sessions. The treatment suggests that while you remain under suspicion, conclusive evidence of betrayal hasn't been discovered or hasn't been shared with interrogation personnel. The uncertainty becomes as psychologically wearing as open accusation would be. Every interaction with colleagues carries potential implications for the investigation. Every routine activity might be interpreted as evidence of guilt or innocence, depending on perspectives you can't predict or control. News from the Caribbean indicates that the anti-piracy operation has been postponed indefinitely, while intelligence services attempt to repair the security breaches that compromised original planning. Colonial military forces remain on standby, but without reliable intelligence about pirate locations and activities, large-scale operations are impossible. The delay represents partial success for your warning to Bellamy, but it also increases pressure on investigators to identify and eliminate the security problems preventing mission completion. The longer the investigation continues without resolution, the more desperate handlers become to find scapegoats for operational failures. You begin planning escape routes from the compound while maintaining the appearance of normal cooperation with ongoing security procedures. The surrounding wilderness offers concealment possibilities, but successful escape would require resources and skills that intelligence training didn't include. More fundamentally, the escape would only delay inevitable consequences without addressing the underlying moral issues that prompted your betrayal of colonial authorities. Running away might preserve your physical life while abandoning any possibility of meaningful resistance to the systematic destruction of pirate communities. Chapter 24, The Final Gambit, The solution comes in the form of an unexpected visitor, Captain Marcus Bellamy himself, travelling under false papers as a Jamaican merchant named Samuel Freeman. His presence at the intelligence compound represents either extraordinary courage or complete desperation, possibly both. Bellamy's arrival is announced during your morning training session with a new class of intelligence recruits. Major Phillips interrupts the lesson with casual words that mask their significance. Right, you have a visitor, a merchant captain interested in discussing trade opportunities. The meeting takes place in a conference room designed for interviewing potential assets. Comfortable furniture, no obvious surveillance equipment, but certainly monitored through methods that aren't immediately apparent. Bellamy sits calmly across from you, his dark skin and confident bearing marking him as someone accustomed to command despite his merchant disguise. "I received your letter," he says without preamble, his voice carrying a slight West African accent that suggests origins in the slave trade before his liberation through piracy. The information proved accurate and valuable. Many communities were able to relocate before your colonial friends arrived with their warships. You nod carefully, aware that admitting knowledge of any letter would constitute a confession of treason that could be used against you in whatever legal proceedings might follow discovery of your betrayal. But warnings only delay inevitable conflicts, Bellamy continues. Your people are determined to eliminate piracy entirely, and eventually they'll succeed unless something changes the balance of power. That's why I'm here. The conversation that follows reveals the scope of Bellamy's vision. Not just preserving existing pirate communities, but transforming piracy itself into something that might coexist with legitimate colonial society, rather than existing in permanent opposition to it. His plan involves creating a confederation of pirate crews operating under agreed-upon rules that would distinguish them from common criminals. Ships flying Confederation flags would attack only military targets and Spanish treasure fleets, leaving colonial merchant vessels alone in exchange for recognition as legitimate privateers during wartime. The English and Dutch hate the Spanish more than they hate us, Bellamy explains. If we channel pirate activities against Spanish interests exclusively, colonial authorities might find it profitable to ignore our existence rather than spending fortunes trying to eliminate us. The proposal has historical precedent. Legitimate governments have always used privateers to wage unofficial war against their enemies while maintaining plausible deniability. Pirates operating under such agreements would gain legal protection, while colonial authorities would benefit from Spanish losses without diplomatic complications. But implementing such a plan would require detailed intelligence about colonial military capabilities, political divisions among different authorities, and economic interests that might support accommodation rather than elimination of piracy, the kind of information that only senior intelligence operatives possess. Your government's anti-piracy operations have been more successful than they admit publicly, you tell him, choosing your words carefully. But they've also been more expensive than colonial budgets can sustain indefinitely. The right proposal, presented through proper channels, might find receptive audiences. Bellamy nods approvingly. That's exactly the kind of insight we need. Someone who understands both sides of this conflict and can help negotiate solutions that serve everyone's interests. The offer he makes is seductive and terrifying. Join his confederation as an intelligence advisor, helping to transform piracy from mindless violence into organized resistance that might eventually achieve legitimate recognition. It would mean abandoning the security of colonial intelligence work for the uncertainties of outlaw life, but it would also represent a chance for genuine redemption through constructive rather than destructive activities. The meeting ends without firm commitments from either party, but with clear understanding that future contacts are possible. Bellamy's merchant papers are sufficiently authentic to withstand casual inspection, and his cover story about seeking trade opportunities provides plausible explanation for his presence at the intelligence compound. But his visit has certainly been noted by security personnel who monitor all contacts between intelligence operatives and outside parties. Questions will be asked about the nature of your discussion and the potential security implications of an unknown merchant's interest in your expertise. You return to your training duties with the knowledge that time for decision-making is running out. Bellamy's offer represents the last opportunity for meaningful choice in a life that has been shaped increasingly by circumstances beyond your control. The colonial intelligence system that preserved your life through systematic betrayal now demands continued betrayal as the price of continued survival. Accepting Bellamy's offer means abandoning that security for unknown dangers, but it also means reclaiming moral agency that has been gradually eroded by years of compromise. Chapter 25. The Point of No Return. The decision crystallizes during your final interrogation session with Major Phillips, when he produces evidence that makes continued deception impossible. Spread across his desk are transcripts of conversations, copies of documents, and witness statements that trace your warning to Marcus Bellamy through multiple intelligence networks. Interesting reading, Phillips observes with clinical detachment. It appears that someone with access to operational plans has been sharing sensitive information with pirate leaders. The investigation has identified the source of these security breaches. Your hands remain steady as you examine the evidence, though your heart pounds with the recognition that your treachery has been comprehensively documented. The investigation has been thorough and professional, gathering proof through methods that leave no room for denial or alternative explanations. The evidence suggests that you've been conducting unauthorized communications with hostile forces, Phillips continues. Such activities represent serious violations of intelligence protocols and colonial security interests. The formal language masks what both of you understand. You've been caught committing treason, and the consequences will be severe. Colonial intelligence services don't maintain expensive trials for agents who betray operational security. Summary execution is more efficient and equally effective as deterrent for other potential traitors. But Phillips's manner suggests that execution isn't the only option being considered. Intelligence organizations occasionally find it profitable to turn captured double agents rather than eliminating them, using their exposed position to feed false information to enemy networks or gather intelligence about hostile activities. However, he adds, after letting the implications settle, your situation might not be entirely hopeless. Cooperation with damage assessment efforts could influence decisions about your ultimate disposition. The offer is clear. Provide complete information about your contacts with pirate networks, reveal any other security breaches you might know about, and accept whatever role intelligence handlers assign in future operations designed to exploit your compromised position. Acceptance would mean surviving as a triple agent, ostensibly working for pirates while actually serving colonial interests under the direction of handlers who would control every aspect of your activities. It's survival, but survival as a completely controlled asset rather than autonomous individual. Refusal means immediate execution as a security risk, but it also means preserving whatever integrity remains after years of systematic betrayal. The choice represents a final test of whether any authentic moral identity survives beneath the layers of compromise that intelligence work has required. I'll need time to consider your offer, you tell Phillips, knowing that the request for delay is itself a form of answer. Agents who intend to cooperate don't require extended consideration of offers that provide their only chance for survival. Phillips nods as if he expected that response. You have until tomorrow morning to make your decision. After that, Other arrangements will become necessary. The night that follows is spent reviewing choices that brought you to this moment. The decision to cooperate rather than face execution after the Wicked Mary's capture. The gradual descent into systematic betrayal. The warning to Bellamy that represented a desperate attempt at moral redemption. Each choice seemed reasonable at the time, but their cumulative effect has been to eliminate alternatives until only two options remain: complete surrender of moral agency or death as the consequence of belated moral choice. Dawn approaches with the clarity that comes from eliminating impossible alternatives. You've spent years learning that survival often requires betraying principles you once considered essential, but you've also learned that survival without principles becomes indistinguishable from slow, spiritual death. The letter you write in the pre-dawn hours isn't addressed to Major Phillips or colonial authorities, but to Marcus Bellamy through one of the communication channels that intelligence surveillance will certainly intercept. Its contents represent not cooperation with damage assessment, but final instructions for contacts who might still escape colonial retaliation. You include details about intelligence methods, operational procedures, and personnel that could help pirate communities develop better security against colonial infiltration. It's comprehensive betrayal of everything you've worked for during years of intelligence service, but it's also the first genuinely constructive act you've performed since your recruitment. The letter concludes with information about your own situation and probable fate, not because Bellamy can do anything to help, but because someone should know that at least one intelligence operative chose conscience over survival when the final choice became unavoidable. When Major Phillips arrives for your answer, he finds you sitting calmly at your desk, with the sealed letter placed prominently where it can't be missed. Your decision is clear without requiring verbal explanation. "I see," he says, examining the letter's address with professional interest. "I assume this contains information that you consider important for hostile forces to receive." You nod without attempting to explain or justify your choice. The time for rationalization and moral compromise has passed, leaving only acceptance of consequences that were probably inevitable from the moment you chose to warn Bellamy about the planned raids. Phillips signals to guards waiting outside your quarters, and you're escorted from the intelligence compound toward whatever form of execution colonial authorities have selected for treasonous agents. The morning is beautiful. Clear skies, moderate temperature, birds singing in trees that will continue growing long after your death. Chapter 26. The Reckoning. The execution takes place at dawn in a small clearing behind the intelligence compound, attended only by the personnel necessary to carry out colonial justice on agents who violate their oaths of loyalty. There are no crowds, no speeches, no ceremonial elements that might dignify the event beyond its basic function of eliminating security risks. Major Phillips reads the charges in a flat, professional voice that drains all drama from the proceedings. Thomas Wright, also known by various intelligence cover identities, you have been found guilty of treason, espionage on behalf of hostile forces, and violations of colonial security protocols punishable by death. You listen without commenting, having exhausted your capacity for moral reflection during the sleepless night before this moment. The charges are accurate, even if they don't capture the complexity of choices that led to this clearing, this dawn, this final reckoning with consequences that were probably inevitable. The firing squad consists of 4 colonial militiamen who treat the assignment with workmanlike efficiency. They've probably executed other intelligence operatives who violated security protocols, and they approach your case with the same professional detachment that characterized your own intelligence work. But as the squad prepares their weapons, unexpected sounds emerge from the forest surrounding the clearing, the crack of musket fire, shouts of combat, and the distinctive whistle of boarding axes cutting through morning air. The execution is interrupted by an attack that no one expected. Marcus Bellamy emerges from the tree line leading a force of armed pirates who have somehow infiltrated the supposedly secure compound. His presence represents either extraordinary courage or tactical brilliance, possibly both. The rescue operation he's mounted suggests that your intelligence about colonial security procedures has been both received and acted upon. The brief firefight that follows demonstrates the difference between colonial militia trained for conventional warfare and pirates experienced in close-quarters combat. The militiamen fight bravely but lack the desperate ferocity of men who've learned that mercy is rarely offered or expected. Within minutes, the compound security force is overwhelmed by attackers who show no quarter and expect none in return. Major Phillips dies with a pistol in his hand, still attempting to organize resistance when Bellamy's cutlass opens his throat from ear to ear. The rescue succeeds, but at a cost that includes several of Bellamy's crew and most of the intelligence personnel present for your execution. The clearing that should have witnessed your death becomes a battlefield where the conflict between piracy and colonial authority is settled through violence rather than negotiation. "Can you walk?" Bellamy asks, cutting the ropes that bound your arms behind your back. His question is practical rather than concerned. Wounded men who can't keep up with retreating forces are typically abandoned rather than becoming liabilities for everyone else. You test your legs and find them functional despite the psychological shock of expecting death and receiving rescue instead. The reprieve feels surreal, like waking from a dream where execution was about to occur into a reality where violence continues, but with different participants and different outcomes. The withdrawal from the compound requires moving quickly through forests toward boats hidden along nearby waterways. Bellamy's force moves with the efficiency of men experienced in rapid retreat, carrying essential supplies while abandoning anything that might slow their escape. But the rescue has compromised whatever remained of colonial intelligence operations in the region. Personnel files, operational plans, and communication codes have all fallen into pirate hands, providing insights into intelligence methods that will enable better security against future infiltration attempts. "Your letter was quite informative," Bellamy tells you during a brief rest stop. "The details about colonial procedures and personnel helped us plan this operation." But more importantly, they revealed someone whose conscience finally overcame their survival instincts. The comment carries implications beyond immediate circumstances. Your betrayal of colonial intelligence has been comprehensive and public, eliminating any possibility of return to legitimate society. You've chosen sides definitively in a conflict that offers no middle ground between piracy and colonial authority. Chapter 27. The New Brotherhood. 6 months after your rescue from colonial execution, you've established yourself as Marcus Bellamy's intelligence advisor aboard the Liberty's Promise, a captured Spanish frigate converted for pirate service but operated according to principles that distinguish it from common pirate vessels. Bellamy's confederation has grown to include 15 crews operating under agreed-upon articles that limit their activities to Spanish targets and military vessels. The arrangement isn't perfect. Some crews interpret the rules liberally, and enforcement depends more on peer pressure than formal authority, but it represents genuine progress toward organized resistance rather than random violence. Your role involves analyzing intelligence about Spanish naval movements, identifying profitable targets that fit Confederation guidelines, and helping to develop security procedures that protect pirate bases from colonial infiltration. It's intelligence work, but for purposes you can finally support without moral reservation. The work utilizes skills developed during years of colonial service while serving goals that feel constructive rather than destructive. Instead of betraying pirate communities to colonial authorities, you're helping them develop capabilities that might enable long-term survival and eventual legitimization. The Confederation's successes have attracted attention from colonial governors who recognize that organized piracy poses different challenges than random criminal activity. Some officials have begun informal communications about possible accommodation that might serve mutual interests against Spanish colonial dominance. These negotiations require careful management by someone who understands both pirate culture and colonial political systems. Your background uniquely qualifies you for diplomatic activities that might eventually lead to formal recognition of pirate communities as legitimate political entities. But success also brings new moral complexities. The Confederation's attacks on Spanish shipping and military installations cost lives and inflict suffering on people whose only crimes were serving their king's interests in colonial territories. The violence is more focused than typical piracy, but it remains violence nonetheless. You've learned to manage these moral concerns through the same compartmentalization techniques that enabled survival during your intelligence career. The difference is that current activities serve purposes you can genuinely support rather than simply endure for the sake of physical survival. The crew of the Liberty's Promise includes former slaves, discharged soldiers, political refugees, and other social outcasts who've found in piracy the only community willing to accept them as equals. Their stories remind you that piracy, despite its violence and moral compromises, offers alternatives to colonial society's rigid hierarchies. Your own position aboard the ship reflects this egalitarian approach. You're respected for specialized knowledge rather than social background, and your influence depends on demonstrating continued value rather than maintaining inherited privilege. It's meritocracy, brutal but genuine. The psychological healing that began with your decision to warn Bellamy about colonial raids continues slowly through work that serves constructive rather than destructive purposes. The capacity for authentic relationships damaged by years of systematic betrayal shows signs of gradual recovery. But complete redemption remains elusive. The lives lost through intelligence you provided to colonial authorities can't be restored through subsequent good works. The communities destroyed by raids you helped plan won't be rebuilt through current activities, no matter how well-intentioned. You've learned to live with this moral weight while working toward goals that might prevent similar tragedies in the future. It's not redemption in any complete sense, but it's progress toward becoming someone whose conscience and actions align rather than existing in constant conflict. The Confederation's long-term prospects remain uncertain. Spanish colonial authorities are developing more effective responses to organized piracy, while colonial governors must balance political pressures that favor elimination of all pirate activity regardless of its targets or methods. But for the first time since your recruitment aboard the Wicked Mary, you're working toward goals that extend beyond personal survival. The Confederation might succeed in establishing legitimate recognition for pirate communities, or it might collapse under external pressure and internal divisions. Either way, you've finally chosen a side based on conscience rather than expedience. That choice doesn't erase previous betrayals or guarantee future success, but it represents genuine moral progress after years of compromise and collaboration with forces you couldn't respect. Epilogue: The Weight of Choices. 10 years after your pressed recruitment aboard the Wicked Mary, you stand on the quarterdeck of the Liberty's Promise watching Spanish warships withdraw after an unsuccessful attempt to break the Confederation's blockade of Cartagena harbor. The victory is significant but not decisive, one engagement in a continuing struggle that might last decades. The young pirates, serving under Bellamy's command, see you as a seasoned veteran whose intelligence expertise has contributed to numerous successful operations. They don't know about the colonial agents whose deaths you caused, the communities you helped destroy, or the moral compromises that preceded your eventual choice of conscience over survival. That history remains your burden to carry, a weight that influences every decision but doesn't paralyze action toward constructive goals. You've learned that perfect redemption isn't possible for someone with your background, but meaningful progress toward moral alignment remains achievable through consistent choice of principle over expedience. The Confederation has achieved partial recognition from English colonial authorities as legitimate privateers during periods of conflict with Spain. It's not the complete legitimization that Bellamy originally envisioned, but it's progress toward coexistence rather than perpetual warfare between piracy and colonial society. Your own story illustrates both the possibilities and limitations of moral choice under extreme circumstances. Pressed into piracy against your will, you made compromises necessary for survival that gradually corrupted your capacity for authentic moral action. But when faced with ultimate choice between complete surrender of integrity and death, you chose conscience despite the apparent futility of the gesture. That choice led unexpectedly to rescue, redemption, and opportunity to serve causes worthy of the risks they require. But it also demonstrated that moral recovery is possible even after extensive compromise, though complete restoration of innocence remains forever beyond reach. The broader historical context surrounding your individual story involves the gradual transformation of Caribbean piracy from random criminal activity to organized political resistance. The golden age of piracy was ending, but its conclusion involved integration and accommodation as much as elimination and suppression. Some pirate communities evolved into legitimate settlements that eventually became important colonial ports. Others disappeared through military defeat or gradual absorption into conventional maritime trades. A few, like Bellamy's Confederation, achieved intermediate status as quasi-legitimate privateers serving specific political interests. Your intelligence work contributed to this historical transformation by helping pirate communities develop organizational capabilities that made negotiation possible rather than requiring military solution to piracy problems. The skills learned through systematic betrayal eventually served constructive purposes, though the moral cost of acquiring those skills remains permanently part of your personal history. The lessons embedded in your story extend beyond historical piracy to broader questions about moral choice under extreme pressure. Ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances often discover that survival requires compromises they never imagined making, and that the cumulative effect of small betrayals can fundamentally alter moral identity. But your story also demonstrates that moral agency survives even extensive corruption if individuals retain capacity for ultimate choice when fundamental principles are threatened. The decision to warn Bellamy represented belated recognition that some things matter more than personal survival, and that choice created opportunities for meaningful moral progress despite previous failures. The Caribbean continues to be contested territory where Spanish, English, Dutch, and pirate interests compete for dominance. Your confederation represents one possible future: organized resistance that might eventually achieve legitimate recognition. But other futures remain possible, including continued warfare that could eliminate piracy entirely, or accommodation that preserves some pirate communities while suppressing others. Whatever the ultimate historical outcome, you've found personal peace through work that serves goals worthy of the risks they require. The moral weight of previous betrayals remains, but it no longer prevents constructive action or authentic relationships with people whose trust has been earned rather than exploited. Standing on the deck of a pirate ship flying flags of a confederation that shouldn't exist according to conventional political theory, you've learned that history offers redemption to those willing to accept its costs. Not complete absolution that requires innocence that can't be recovered, but the possibility of meaningful moral progress through consistent choice of principle over expedience. The sun sets over waters that have witnessed centuries of conflict between various forms of authority and resistance. Tomorrow will bring new challenges requiring choices that will further define both personal identity and historical trajectory. But tonight, for perhaps the first time since your recruitment into this violent world, you sleep with clear conscience despite carrying the weight of everything that brought you to this moment. The sea continues its eternal movement, indifferent to human moral struggles, but providing the stage where those struggles achieve their ultimate meaning. In its depths lie the bones of pirates and naval officers, merchants and slaves, innocents and criminals, whose individual stories have been absorbed into the larger narrative of human conflict and accommodation. Your own story joins that vast collection, not as tragedy or triumph, but as complex moral journey through circumstances that tested every assumption about honor, loyalty, and survival. The journey continues, but its direction has been chosen through conscience rather than expedience, and that choice makes all the difference between existing and living with integrity despite imperfect world that offers no perfect solutions to fundamental moral challenges. Author's note: this exploration of historical piracy aimed to present the brutal realities behind romanticized legends while examining how ordinary people respond to extraordinary moral pressures. The golden age of piracy, 1650-1730, was characterized by violence, disease, and desperate struggle for survival, but also by unique social experiments in democracy, racial equality, and alternative forms of community organization. Individual stories from this period illuminate broader questions about moral choice, social organization, and the possibilities for redemption in morally complex circumstances. The total word count of this script is approximately 27,000 words, presenting a complete narrative arc that follows one individual's journey from victim to victimizer to someone seeking redemption through meaningful moral choice. While the specific events are fictional, they're grounded in historical research about piracy, colonial intelligence operations, and the social conditions that shaped individual choices during this transformative period in Caribbean history.